Daenerys stood upon the rocky beach of Dragonstone, the sea wind lifting her silver-white hair and sending it streaming across her cheeks. It had been mere hours since her small fleet had landed, but the chill in the air reminded her she was no longer in sun-scorched Essos. Westeros welcomed her with biting cold and foreboding clouds, not the triumphant warmth she had imagined in her years of dreaming. Still, it was land, her rightful home, if the old songs and the lineages she had so carefully studied were to be believed. There was a time when she would have trusted that heritage alone to be her weapon, along with the might of her dragons, but she had learned too much in Meereen and Astapor, in Yunkai and across the Red Waste, to rely on steel and fire alone. If she was going to claim the Iron Throne, she would need more than Dragonflame. She would need alliances, and she would have to forge them like a blacksmith at a blazing forge, with meticulous care, patience, and an awareness of the slightest flaw. Tyrion Lannister stood at her side, a hand shielding his mismatched eyes from the wind, as if measuring every stone spire of Dragonstone's ancient fortress. Varys was there too, perched behind them, silent but watchful, the master of whispers who had served kings and queens alike. A small contingent of Dothraki remained below on the beach, unsettled by the cold, unfamiliar ocean. Their chants and the stamping of their horses' hooves echoed across the jagged rocks. Grey Worm directed the Unsullied as they secured the perimeter, ever disciplined and stoic despite the breezes that buffeted their shaved heads. Daenerys could not help but remember the legends whispered to her as a child, that Dragonstone's halls were shaped by Dragonflame itself, that her ancestors had raised it from the rock when they first crossed from Valyria. She felt the ghosts of those ancestors thrumming in her veins now, calling her to reclaim a kingdom stolen from House Targaryen. But she also recalled her own vow. She was no butcher queen, no tyrant. Slavers and despots she had faced before, and she had learned how difficult it was to free a people while forcing them at sword's point. If she was truly to be a breaker of chains, she must break the chains of old hatreds and distrust as well. In a small council chamber warmed by sputtering braziers, she gathered her advisors around a table carved to represent the Seven Kingdoms. Her fingers traced the outline of the North, that vast realm she had never seen, her heart pounding with curiosity and a flicker of dread. Beyond the North, hidden in the lands of always winter, was a threat she had only recently learned to believe in: the White Walkers. Tyrion had advised her that while the Iron Throne was her birthright, it was useless if the entire continent lay in ruin beneath an undead horde. So there was urgency in her desire to unify these realms, urgency she would harness carefully. She looked to Missandei, whose keen eyes followed Daenerys's every move. The translator, once a slave, possessed a mind as sharp as Tyrion's, and a heart that reminded Daenerys of her core purpose: justice. Varys, silent, observed the room's tension. Tyrion coughed into his hand, his other palm splayed atop the table. "We must reach out," Daenerys began, her voice soft yet resonant in the chilly chamber. "I have the dragons. That might make some lords bend the knee out of fear, but fear will not keep them loyal when winter's done. I need them to believe in me, to believe in the world we will build." Tyrion nodded. "To earn that belief, we must speak to them not as invaders, but as prospective allies. A Targaryen queen will already inspire fear in some, especially after the rumors of King Aerys' madness still swirl in Westeros. We must prove you are not your father." Daenerys' gaze drifted to the high window, where darkness was starting to creep across the sea. "They will want proof, I know, but I won't stoop to burning cities or forcing them to accept me. I've seen too much destruction in Essos. Let us send ravens to each major house. Let them know we invite them here to Dragonstone. We will speak of the great war coming from the north, and we will speak of a future in which each house retains its dignity. We'll show them we are no enemy." Varys leaned forward, the light playing oddly on his smooth scalp. "You ask them to come here to speak, but many will be wary. Cersei has had years to spread rumors of your savagery, not to mention the Targaryen claim to dragons. Houses that still support her may see it as a trap." Daenerys' lips thinned, and she let out a slow exhale. "Then they will hear from their own envoys that we did not hold a sword to their throats. I want them to see the truth, that I come not to pillage, but to reclaim my inheritance and unite Westeros against the threat from beyond the wall." Tyrion exchanged a careful look with Varys. Though quiet, the spider's eyes flickered with approval. "We must craft our letters carefully," Tyrion said, voice measured. "House Tyrell has suffered under the Lannisters. They will be most eager to find a new alliance. House Martell lost their ruling prince in the capital, and many suspect the Lannisters had a hand in that, too. House Greyjoy, well, that's complicated, but I believe Yara is more open to alliances than her uncle Euron. House Stark rules the North after many tragedies. We will have to show them that your aims are not purely Targaryen ascendancy but a collective future. And as for the Lannisters, well, we know them best, don't we?" Daenerys placed her palms flat on the table, feeling the rough grooves of the carved map beneath her skin. "Yes, we do. And I want them all. I want them to speak to me as people, not as mythic adversaries. If we are to build a better Westeros, let it begin here." The ravens flew at dawn. Daenerys stood in the courtyard as each messenger took to the sky, beating dark wings through the coastal gale. The letters were penned in the queen's own hand, bearing her seal and the careful words Tyrion helped her craft. She wrote that she had returned to Westeros to save it, not to destroy it, inviting each house to send an envoy to Dragonstone for a grand council. Some might scoff or ignore her entirely, but if even a few answered, it would be the beginning of something new. Days passed, and then weeks. The great hall of Dragonstone remained cold despite the roaring fires, but Daenerys found warmth in the presence of her small but loyal retinue. She took daily walks along the ramparts, gazing out at the sea, sometimes accompanied by Tyrion, sometimes by Missandei or Grey Worm. She was restless, and on the nights when the storms rocked the castle with howling winds, she dreamt of the others, her potential allies, arriving like ships into a harbor of hope. Finally, they came, not all at once, but in drips and drabs. The first was a modest galley bearing the golden rose of House Tyrell. Olenna Tyrell had not come in person. Her advanced age and failing health, the envoy said, but she had sent her granddaughter's cousin, a well-spoken lady who radiated the floral pride of Highgarden. Next arrived a slender ship flying the sun and spear of Dorne, carrying a desert-born diplomat who introduced himself as Corbin Euler. More followed. From the Vale, an earnest young knight who served as an emissary for Lord Robin Arryn. From the Iron Islands, to Daenerys' surprise, came Yara Greyjoy herself, teeth bared in a grin of anticipation. The North and the Stormlands took longest to reply, but eventually, an envoy from Winterfell arrived. A tall woman with auburn hair shot through with silver, a guard of loyal men wearing the direwolf sigil behind her. And then there was a presence from King's Landing, a delegation of black-armored men, no doubt Lannister loyalists, though it was unclear if Cersei herself had sanctioned them or simply let them come to gauge Daenerys' strength. They congregated in the Great Hall, which Tyrion had decorated as best he could with Targaryen banners and heavy drapes to ward off the chill. Daenerys took her seat on a carved throne of black stone, flanked by Missandei, Tyrion, and Grey Worm. Varys lingered behind a column, observing every shifting expression. The lords and ladies who attended these talks eyed one another with suspicion. Dorne's men stood well away from those wearing any Lannister crest, and the Tyrell representative offered a stiff nod to the others, clearly measuring the mood. Daenerys waited until every last person had settled, until the hush in the hall was thick enough to cut with a blade. Then she rose, head held high, her posture regal but not menacing. "Lords and ladies of Westeros," she began, her voice echoing in the lofty chamber. "Thank you for answering my summons. Some of you may doubt my words, some of you may question my intentions, yet you came. That alone speaks to the possibility of trust. We stand at a crossroads. The entire continent stands at a crossroads. We can remain divided, continuing old feuds, or we can unite against the true threat from beyond the wall." A rumble of murmurs spread across the hall. A tall, stern-faced man wearing the Lannister lion upon his cloak spoke first. "Your Grace, you speak of a threat from the north. You mean the rumors of whites and walking corpses? The Queen in King's Landing holds that these are fables." Before Daenerys could answer, The lady of House Tyrell's delegation said, Olenna Tyrell has heard disturbing reports from travelers who escaped the Neck. Word spreads that wildlings are fleeing in droves, that strange shadows roam the night. We cannot dismiss these rumors entirely. Yara Greyjoy snorted. If the dead are walking, I'd like to see them try crossing the sea. But you must have some reason for believing, yes. She directed her question to Daenerys, arms crossed over her chest. As though everything was a challenge, she stood ready to meet. Daenerys gestured to Tyrion. He cleared his throat. We have information from the wall itself, from brothers of the Night's Watch. They claim the army of the dead grows. We have ravens from the citadel in Old Town, confirming an abnormal winter and signs that the long night could be returning. Dismiss it if you will, but recall the tales that children in Westeros have grown up on for centuries. The White Walkers are more than nursery stories. We do not simply want you to kneel to Daenerys Targaryen. We ask for your alliance in facing an existential threat. A measured silence followed. The representative from the Vale spoke. And what of your claim to the throne itself, your grace? Even if we face the army of the dead, we also have a queen in King's Landing, by law if not by right. Laws are written by the victors, interjected Yara, smirking. But the Iron Throne belongs to House Targaryen by blood. We all know how Robert's rebellion ended. Not exactly a neat legal line of succession, was it? The Vale Knight flushed, but Daenerys interceded, raising a hand. I have come to reclaim what was my father's, yes. But more importantly, I wish to break the wheel that has crushed the people of Westeros for generations. My father was a cruel man, driven to madness. I will not hide from that truth, but I am not the Mad King. I am Daenerys Stormborn, breaker of chains, and I seek to prevent any further bloodshed among our houses. If we do not unite now, I fear the next war will not be over crowns, but over survival itself. She scanned the faces before her, gauging their reactions. Some were doubtful, others merely curious, and yet a handful seemed intrigued. The Tyrell envoy bowed slightly. Highgarden is prepared to negotiate terms. We have seen how House Lannister has repaid kindness with betrayal. If you can promise that our lands will be respected, that the field workers will keep their harvests, and that House Tyrell shall have a voice in your new reign, we are willing to rally to you. Yara chimed in with a grin. If you can promise me independence for the Iron Islands, or at least some measure of self-rule, I'll gladly bring ships to the cause. My people, as you know, prefer to do things our way, but we've been burned too often by southern kings. A hush fell as Daenerys considered the Ironborn's request. She knew the Iron Islands had a proud tradition, but if every region demanded independence, the realm might fracture. Still, a wise ruler must be flexible. Let us discuss the details, Daenerys replied. I can grant you far greater autonomy than any ruler has before. The details of taxes, trade, and self-governance can be worked out. But in return, I'll need your loyalty in this war to come. I'll need your ships, and your oath to defend this realm when called upon. Yara nodded once, though caution flickered in her eyes. I'll consider it. Show me that your word is true, and the Ironborn will stand with you against the dead, or against any who would threaten us. The others stirred, sensing a shift. Negotiations began in earnest, and the dull roar of voices echoed through the great hall. They argued over details, from shipping lanes to the question of whether House Martell would be content with the Lannisters in any position of power. The hours wore on, and Daenerys listened more than she spoke, letting Tyrion deftly guide the discussions. She saw how her hand weighed each side's demands, balancing old enmities. In subtle ways, Daenerys interceded to show fairness. She refused to condemn all Lannisters for the sins of a few, yet she offered House Tyrell assurance that their lands would be protected. She listened to the Dorne envoy's grievances about Prince Oberyn's death, acknowledging their anger at the crown, but asked them to channel that fury toward forging a new realm free of such injustices. Night fell, and still they debated, voices growing hoarse. Daenerys eventually adjourned the gathering, inviting them to feast on simple fare in Dragonstone's dining hall. The delegates eyed one another warily, but hunger won out, and they sat at long tables lit by flickering torches. Daenerys joined them, ignoring the raised eyebrows from some who expected a queen to dine separately. She ate alongside them, drinking watered wine and exchanging quiet words. She saw how the Tyrell envoy relaxed slightly, how the Dornish emissary revealed a sense of humor, how even the Vale's stony-faced knight allowed a small smile when Tyrion told a ribald joke. Yara demanded stronger spirits and laughed loudly at Grey Worm's stoic demeanor, though she complimented him on his martial bearing. After the meal, in the private alcoves of the castle, Daenerys met with several delegates individually. She spoke with Yara Greyjoy, who was direct in her demands for the Iron Islands. She met the Dorne envoy, Corbin Euler, who brought a personal letter from Illyria Sand. Though her rule in Dorne was contested, she remained influential. Daenerys assured him that she wanted Dorne's rightful leadership to be recognized and that old vendettas would be handled with justice, not vengeance. One by one, she tried to shape alliances, bridging differences by focusing on their shared future. She did not raise her voice, did not threaten. The memory of burning slavers with dragonflame in Essos weighed upon her. But she had no wish to invoke such terror here, not unless pushed to an extreme. Days turned into weeks, and the castle's corridors filled with whispered negotiations. More ships arrived, some from the Stormlands, curious about these talks. From the north, Lady Brienne of Tarth came bearing letters from Sansa Stark, who ruled in Winterfell alongside her brother Jon Snow, now known widely as King in the North. Brienne's presence was a powerful statement in itself. A knight pledged to the protection of the Starks, a woman who had earned renown for her honor. Daenerys received her graciously, and Brienne spoke plainly. Lady Sansa has heard of your plan to unify the realm. She has only one condition. The North must remain under Stark governance, free to rule its own affairs, and you must swear to aid us if the threat beyond the wall grows dire. Daenerys pressed her lips together, thinking of the unstoppable tide of whites and White Walkers. I intend no harm to the North, she replied. Their fight is my fight. If the king in the North, Jon Snow, can be persuaded to come to Dragonstone himself, we could discuss terms in person. I want to hear from the man who leads the war against the undead. Brienne nodded, promising to relay the message, and Daenerys saw in her calm blue eyes a spark of possibility, another path opening. As the negotiations deepened, Daenerys found she could hardly sleep. The stone walls seemed to whisper to her in the dark. Occasionally, she would climb to the top of the keep where her dragons roost. Regal, Viserion, and Drogon soared above the sea, their silhouettes dark against the moonlight. She would watch them, her heart swelling with a protective fierceness. She still carried the memories of how people in Essos had cowered when they saw dragons scorching the sky. Here, she wished to use them as symbols of hope, not fear. Yet she knew that to some, the sight of dragons was too closely tied to the horrors of the past. Carefully, she introduced the delegates to her children, letting them see the dragons from a distance, to witness their majesty without unleashing flames. She explained how dragons were as much a part of her legacy as the Iron Throne, and that if the army of the dead truly marched south, Westeros might need fire-breathing allies more than ever. She recalled a moment with the Vale envoy, who stood trembling before the monstrous shape of Drogon perched on a parapet. "Gods have mercy," he whispered, voice shaky. "I see now what it means to be called the Mother of Dragons." Daenerys placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "He is terrifying, yes, but so are the threats we face. We can use that terror to defend the living, not destroy them." It was a subtle kind of politics, this mixture of forging personal connections, bridging ancient feuds, and showcasing power without brandishing it. Tyrion guided her, instructing her on each house's history, their insecurities, their hopes. Yet Daenerys felt her own instincts sharpen. She knew when to apply gentle persuasion, when to let silence speak for her. Gradually, delegations that had come with suspicion began to show cautious optimism. A few even declared their readiness to sign an alliance, pending certain conditions. The great question that loomed was whether the Crown, Cersei Lannister, would acknowledge any of these overtures, or whether she would cling to her precarious seat of power. Messages arrived from King's Landing that spoke of fortifying the city walls, of new alliances rumored between the Crown and Euron Greyjoy, who still contested Yara's leadership of the Iron Islands. Daenerys did not know how many men or how much gold Cersei truly had left, but the possibility of open war still flickered on the horizon. However, Daenerys remained steadfast. She would not be the one to ignite that conflict first, not while she still had hopes of forging a united front for the war that truly mattered. Late one evening, she paced the dimly lit library of Dragonstone, where ancient Valyrian tomes lined the shelves. Tyrion found her there, leafing through a half-burned genealogy. His footsteps echoed on the stone floor. "You ought to rest, Your Grace," he said softly, though she could hear the hint of a smile in his tone. She turned, exhaustion tugging at her eyes. "I can't seem to stop thinking. The Great War, the alliances, whether I'm doing the right thing. Every choice feels critical." Tyrion joined her, scanning the same page she'd been reading. "Ruling is a monumental task, but you've already done it in Meereen, and you learned from your triumphs and your mistakes. You've proven to these lords and ladies that you're not just another conqueror with a fancy name. And yet I feel I've barely begun," Daenerys admitted. "I used to dream of armies bending the knee, of dragons overwhelming my enemies. Now I realize that bending the knee out of fear creates resentment. Perhaps I can't avoid some enemies, but if I can earn the respect and trust of these houses, maybe we can build something lasting. Something better." Tyrion placed a hand on her arm, almost fatherly in his sympathy. "You're more than a conqueror, Daenerys. You have a heart. It's your greatest strength. The question is whether the lords of Westeros will embrace that heart or see it as weakness." She closed the book, running her fingers across its cracked spine. "They'll see what I show them," she whispered, "and I will show them a queen who fights for them, who wants to end the cycle of bloodshed and cruelty. Let that be my legacy if I live to shape it." Morning brought fresh developments. Word came that Jon Snow himself was en route to Dragonstone, accompanied by a small retinue. Daenerys' breath caught at the message. Jon Snow, who was said to have died and been reborn. Jon Snow, a Stark in everything but name, now a king of sorts in the north. She felt an odd swirl of anticipation. Everything she had heard of him spoke of honor, of staunch loyalty, and a driving determination to defend his people. A man who was rumored to have faced the White Walkers directly. If he confirmed the truth of this threat, perhaps the other houses would unify more quickly. Or perhaps he would demand immediate action that she was not yet prepared to give. When Jon arrived, it was with little fanfare. A handful of northern guards and Ser Davos Seaworth, whose craggy face and direct manner had served Stannis Baratheon once. Daenerys received them in the throne room, an echo of the first gathering of delegates, but now with more tension, more silent watchers from each house. Jon Snow wore a heavy fur cloak, and though his manner was reserved, Daenerys could see the weight of leadership etched into his gray eyes. She rose to greet him, refusing to make him bend the knee unless he chose to do so willingly. "Your Grace," he said, dipping his head politely. She inclined hers in response. "King in the North, welcome to Dragonstone." There were no immediate demands, no outbursts. Instead, a quiet understanding seemed to pass between them. Two leaders, burdened by destinies they hadn't sought but had accepted nonetheless. Jon's first words were about the Night King, the army of the dead, the threat that grew with each passing day of winter. Daenerys listened, letting him speak of how he had fought at Hardhome, how he had seen the terror that lay beyond the wall. His words gave substance to the rumors, and the hall shuddered with the quiet fear of those who listened. When he finished, Daenerys nodded. "We have heard these accounts. I sent word to the houses that the great threat was in the north, not in King's Landing or here. Some have believed me, some remain skeptical." Jon's jaw tightened. "They won't be skeptical long if the dead march south. But we need more than words. We need dragonglass to kill them. We need alliances, soldiers, all of it. So I come to you not to question your right to rule, but to plead for your help." She regarded him thoughtfully. "You speak plainly. I appreciate that. I can provide dragonglass. It is said there's a rich vein under Dragonstone itself. My men can help you mine it if that is what you need. And the dragons? If it comes to war against the undead, my children will fight. But I must ask for the North's allegiance. Not through conquest, but through shared purpose. We need to stand together. Jon's gaze flicked over the carved walls, the Targaryen sigil. The North has always valued its independence. We fought off Aegon once, or at least pledged to him on our own terms. We can discuss the nature of our alliance, but if you stand against the Night King, the North will stand with you. We have no choice. Tyrion cleared his throat. That's a start, wouldn't you say? Jon and Daenerys exchanged a tense smile. The hall seemed to exhale, and from that moment, the tide began to turn. Word spread among the delegates that the king in the north confirmed the threat. He worked alongside Daenerys' men to map out a strategy, collecting the names of houses that might send troops to the north when the time came. The negotiations for the throne itself took a secondary position, overshadowed by the urgency of the undead invasion. Delegates began penning letters to their lords, urging them to gather archers, to prepare provisions. Suddenly, the petty squabbles over succession seemed trivial compared to a war against winter's horrors. Daenerys and Jon spent many late hours in the war room, poring over maps. At first, they were guarded, each uncertain how much to trust the other. But slowly, they found a shared earnestness. Daenerys realized Jon was no typical lord. He carried a fierce devotion to his people, as she did to hers. Jon came to see that Daenerys was not the mad conqueror his ancestors had feared, but a leader with compassion. As their respect for each other grew, so did the consensus among the delegates. Some houses that had teetered on the edge now leaned firmly toward alliance, if only to avoid the wrath of the White Walkers. Cersei's response came in the form of a raven, terse and haughty. The Queen Regent of the Seven Kingdoms does not recognize the authority of the pretender Daenerys Stormborn, nor her ridiculous claims of an undead army. Any who conspire with her shall be deemed traitors to the crown. This letter kindled strong reactions. The delegates bristled, outraged that Cersei dismissed the threat. Some asked Daenerys if she meant to march on King's Landing now, to dethrone the Lannister queen. But Daenerys refused immediate action. If she will not join us, we cannot force her to see reason with violence, she declared. We need every resource for the real war. If the threat from the north is as grave as we believe, we cannot spare thousands of lives storming the capital. Let her keep her throne for now. Winter will force her hand eventually. The news of this stance spread, and many in the realm marveled that a Targaryen queen was taking the high road. Gradually, the lines shifted. More houses, seeing the practicality of preparing for the long night, declared openly for Daenerys. They understood that whether she wore a crown or not, she was forging a coalition that would protect the living. And for the first time in generations, the great houses of Westeros were beginning to align not out of fear or conquest, but out of a mutual interest in survival. The Martells, the Tyrells, parts of the Stormlands, the Vale, the North, and half the Iron Islands recognized Daenerys as their protector, if not yet their undisputed queen. Even among the Lannisters themselves, whispers began that perhaps Cersei was madder than the Mad King, clinging to illusions of power. Some minor Lannister bannermen quietly reached out to Tyrion, hoping for safe passage or at least neutrality in the wars to come. Tyrion, wryly amused, facilitated these contacts, never scorning them but carefully tucking them away for the right moment. Amid all these maneuvers, Daenerys insisted on continuing the real work, forging alliances face to face. She traveled to Highgarden, escorted by her Unsullied, where she met Lady Olenna Tyrell on her deathbed. She sat at the old woman's side, holding her wrinkled hand, listening to the venerable matriarch's sharp tongue. Olenna bestowed her blessing, praising Daenerys for her willingness to negotiate, but warning that no good deed goes unpunished in this realm. Daenerys returned to Dragonstone with a heavy heart but renewed resolve. She visited Dorne next, meeting the remnants of House Martell, who pledged their spears and archers if she would spare them from Lannister revenge. She assured them that, once the undead were dealt with, they would see justice done. In each journey, she refrained from heavy-handed shows of power, letting her kindness and humility guide the talks. She made careful appearances with her dragons, showcasing Drogon's might not as a threat against the Lord's holdfasts but as a warning of what she could unleash against the real foe in the north. Children from local villages gathered, eyes wide in awe, and some lords, too, found themselves speechless at the living symbols of House Targaryen. Daenerys used these encounters to remind them, "This is not about me or a single house. This is about all of us, fighting the long night together." To many, it was the first time they had seen a monarch speak of unity without cunning or arrogance. Word of her travels spread like wildfire across the 7 kingdoms. Songs were composed, some calling her the Dragon Queen of Mercy, others naming her a fool for not pressing her advantage. Nonetheless, she succeeded in sowing seeds of solidarity. By the time she returned to Dragonstone, the shape of the alliance was nearly complete, with only a few holdouts. House Baratheon was effectively extinct, though pockets in the Stormlands still clung to the memory of Stannis or the younger Baratheon line. House Greyjoy remained divided between Yara's faction and Euron's, and House Lannister, perched precariously in King's Landing, refused to see sense. As winter's chill deepened, Daenerys convened one final assembly on Dragonstone. Delegates crowded the halls more than ever before. Jon Snow, newly returned from a foray beyond the wall to confirm the undead threat, stood by her side. Tyrion waited at her left hand, scanning the crowd for flickers of dissent. Yara stood near the front, arms folded, with Theon by her side, recently rescued from Euron's clutches, still shaken but determined to support his sister. The Dornish contingent flanked the Tyrell delegation, while Knights of the Vale mingled with Stormland bannermen. Even some Tully representatives from the riverlands had come, grudgingly leaving the chaos of the war-ravaged fields to see if Daenerys truly intended to restore order. Daenerys rose and looked upon the assembly. She saw fear, hope, suspicion, and resolve mingling in the delegates' faces. She took a deep breath. No fiery speeches, she told herself. Let them see your earnest heart. Lords and ladies of Westeros, she began, and a hush fell. I stand before you as the daughter of King Aerys II Targaryen. I do not deny my lineage or my claim, but neither do I deny that this realm has suffered under tyrants, that houses have been shattered by war, that small folk have starved while lords bickered. I have crossed the seas not only to claim a throne, but to ensure that none of you face the horrors I have seen in Essos, or the horrors that walk now beyond the wall. She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room. Jon Snow has seen the Night King with his own eyes. He has fought whites. He tells us that the army of the dead marches south even now. We have the means to fight them, dragonglass, dragonfire, steel, and your combined strength. But only if we stand together. Only if we look beyond old grudges and question the crowns we once served. I do not want to reign over a kingdom of ashes. I want to protect you, to lead you to a new era. One where the Iron Throne is more than a symbol of power, it is a seat of justice. She clasped her hands at her waist. I ask you now to pledge yourselves to this cause, to our cause. Pledge to stand with me against the Night King. When we have defeated him, we will build a realm that offers each region autonomy, respecting your customs, your lands. We will reform the laws that have oppressed so many. We will ensure that the Targaryen name stands for justice and unity, not fear. At that, she looked to the side. Jon Snow stepped forward. Winterfell stands with Daenerys Targaryen. The words rang in the hall. We have seen what the dead can do. We can't fight it alone. We welcome any who stand with us when the long night falls. Yara Greyjoy, arms crossed, proclaimed, the Iron Islands will sail for this alliance. We are not kneelers, but we stand with the Dragon Queen. The Tyrell envoy, voice trembling slightly, declared, Highgarden pledges to supply food and men. We will trust in Daenerys' leadership so that our fields are not scorched and our people can thrive again. One by one, the voices rose. Dorne, the Vale, the Riverlands, the Stormlands. Though the words differed, the meaning was the same. They would commit. Daenerys felt tears prick at her eyes. She saw that she had accomplished more than just forging a coalition. She had inspired hope. For a moment, a hush fell again, and in that hush, she felt the weight of it all settle upon her shoulders, a weight she was willing to bear. The next few days were a blur of logistical planning. Armies began forming, shipments of dragonglass were arranged. Ravens flew across the realm to finalize muster points. Daenerys personally oversaw the forging of new weapons from the mined dragonglass. She traveled briefly to the north with Jon to inspect the defenses, meeting Sansa Stark and Arya Stark, forging friendships born of mutual respect for what they had each endured. The north was harsh, but Daenerys found a strange comfort in its stark beauty. Her dragons did not love the cold, yet they adapted, curling around the edges of Winterfell's courtyards, warming the gloom with their fiery breath. All the while, the tension with King's Landing remained an unmoving cloud at the southern horizon. Cersei refused negotiations, forging her own deals with mercenaries from Essos, ignoring the growing unity in the rest of the realm. Daenerys decided that could wait. Let Cersei cling to the crumbling Red Keep. Let her gather sellswords. The real war was coming from the north, and to the north Daenerys's focus remained. Deep in her heart, she felt a faint regret. So much simpler it would have been to march on the capital with her dragons and take what was hers by blood. But that path was soaked in innocents' blood as well, and she was determined to break that cycle. If the White Walkers were defeated, she reasoned, the realm would see who truly cared for the living. That alone might topple Cersei without a single flame unleashed upon the city. Battles soon erupted as Whites began testing the edges of the living's defenses. In scattered skirmishes near the last hearth, the dead clashed with the living. The combined armies of the North and the Vale, reinforced by a contingent of Unsullied and Dornish cavalry, managed to drive them back. Word of these victories spread, bolstering morale. Daenerys flew overhead on Drogon more than once, unleashing dragonfire upon hordes of Whites, giving the North a glimpse of the unstoppable power she commanded. But she did so at the urging of Jon and Sansa, ensuring that no living settlement was endangered. When the Whites were scattered, Daenerys landed among the troops, who gazed upon her not with fear, but with gratitude. Over the following weeks, more alliances solidified. Even some Lannister soldiers slipped away from their posts, traveling north to fight for the living. On one cold dawn, Daenerys personally welcomed a ragged band of knights led by a minor Lannister cousin who claimed he could no longer serve a queen blind to the real danger. Daenerys accepted their swords with measured grace, ensuring they knew they were not her enemies. The armies continued to fortify the neck, the point where the North joined the South. Tyrion, traveling between Dragonstone and Winterfell, found more lords in the riverlands ready to provide rations. It was a monumental logistic puzzle, but Daenerys' coalition was slowly knitting the realm together in a way no king had done for centuries. Amid the planning, Daenerys found moments of warmth, forging friendships and alliances on a personal level. She shared stories with Sansa late at night, hearing of how the elder Stark daughter survived King's Landing and Ramsay Bolton's cruelty, how she rebuilt Winterfell's honor. She practiced swordplay with Arya, who surprised her with the deftness of a water dancer. She exchanged counsel with Brienne, who admired her sincerity. And sometimes, away from prying eyes, she and Jon took quiet walks through the courtyard. The difference in their upbringings was stark, yet they found themselves drawn together by the enormity of their responsibilities and their shared devotion to their people. In those stolen moments, there was something that approached solace, or perhaps even affection. But the storms of war were too near for them to dwell on it. The Great War came in earnest when the White Walkers reached the Wall. Reports said the Night King had a monstrous undead beast of his own, an icebound dragon that had once been Viserion, stolen from Daenerys during a harrowing encounter north of the Wall. The news struck Daenerys like a knife to the heart, and the realm trembled at the implication. If the Night King could raise a dragon, the final battle would be more terrible than any living memory. The alliances Daenerys had worked so hard to forge would face their ultimate test. And face it they did. The combined armies of the living gathered at the fields beyond Winterfell, forging lines of defense in the snow. Stark bannermen stood side by side with Tyrell pikemen. Dornish light cavalry readied themselves to swoop in from the flanks. Ironborn archers knocked dragonglass-tipped arrows. The Vale's knights formed a resolute front. In the sky, Drogon and Rhaegal circled, with Daenerys astride the great black beast and Jon astride the green. Their hearts pounded with the knowledge of what they were about to confront. The undead advanced like a black tide, a silent wave of death under a blood-red sky. The only sounds were the howling wind and the faint crackling of ice. Daenerys soared above them, scanning the battlefield. She saw the glimmer of the Night King's icy crown far below, accompanied by white walkers on undead horses. Her lips tightened with anger and sorrow. Rhaegal flew close by, carrying Jon. At Daenerys' signal, they dove. Drogon unleashed a torrent of flame. Waves of whites shriveled in an instant, but the lines kept coming, impossibly. On the ground, the armies of the living braced, dragonglass blades and arrows taking their toll. Screams tore across the night as the dead smashed into the living ranks. Yet the lines held, for each soldier knew they fought not just for house or liege, but for the entire realm. The Night King's ice dragon soared into view, spewing cold flames. Daenerys' breath caught in her throat as she recognized her lost child twisted by necromancy. Drogon roared in fury, meeting the undead beast in the sky with a thunderous clash. The final confrontation played out amid swirling snow and the roar of dragons. Below, white walkers snapped swords of ice against the living, and the living responded with heart and steel. Knights from the Vale died alongside Dornish spearmen, united in their last stand. Jon and Daenerys danced through the sky, coordinating their dragons' attacks to finally corner the undead Viserion. With a mighty spearing of dragonglass, hammered into a massive bolt by Gendry's forges, Jon fired from Rhaegal's flank and the ice dragon cracked, shrieking in a terrifying echo before dissolving into shards of ice. The Night King reeled below, and Daenerys saw an opening, diving Drogon low. Distracting the monstrous figure, she allowed Arya Stark, ghost swift through the ranks of whites, to leap and drive a Valyrian steel dagger in. To his back, the Night King shattered into icy fragments, and across the battlefield, the whites collapsed in a lifeless heap. The Great War ended under the pale winter sun, with the living standing battered but unbroken. Daenerys landed Drogon on a field strewn with broken bodies, living and dead. The wind stung her eyes, and tears slipped down her cheeks unbidden. She saw the battered banners of many houses: Tyrell, Stark, Martell, Greyjoy, Arryn, still fluttering in the breeze. The alliance had held. They had fought together and won together. Survivors knelt in the snow to tend to the wounded, to cradle fallen comrades, to give thanks to the gods. Jon dismounted Rhaegal and limped toward Daenerys, eyes wide with relief, face smeared with soot and blood. They embraced, a moment of raw emotion in a battlefield of ghosts. Around them, the living shared stunned smiles, tears, even laughter. They had faced the long night and emerged alive. In the aftermath, there were funerals that lasted days. Winterfell's great courtyard became an open pyre for both the noble and the common soldier. Daenerys walked among them, comforting the weeping families, feeling the cost of every lost life in her soul. She vowed to see that their sacrifices would not be in vain. Across the realm, as news spread of the victory against the dead, lords and ladies spoke of Daenerys Targaryen with respect, even reverence. The woman who had come with dragons but had used them to save the kingdom, not to conquer it. The queen who had united the great houses through words, not flames. When the final pyres were lit and the snow began to thaw, Daenerys called for a grand assembly at the Godswood in Winterfell. Delegates from across Westeros crowded into the north. Even some from King's Landing trickled in, for Cersei's hold on power had been eroded by her refusal to join the war. A hush fell as Daenerys stood beneath the ancient weirwood tree, its red leaves whispering in the cold breeze. She spoke softly. "We have survived the long night because we stood together. Each house, each region, each person contributed. The victory is yours as much as mine. Now we must decide how to move forward. For many of you, I am your queen by right of birth. For others, you followed me not because of birthright but because of what we stood for. We must decide if we continue as a single realm or if each region will remain independent under a broader alliance." I have no wish to force submission. I only desire that the realm know peace, justice, and the possibility of a better future." Sansa Stark, standing with her siblings, gave a measured nod. "The North remembers those who came to our aid. For that we are grateful. The North also cherishes its freedom. But we will not turn our backs on an alliance that has saved us all." Yara Greyjoy lifted her chin. "The Iron Islands likewise. We want the freedom to rule ourselves, but we pledge to stand by the Targaryen queen if threats arise. No more pillaging our neighbors," she added with a wry grin. "We'll carve a new path." The representatives from the other houses exchanged glances. Dorne, the Vale, the Riverlands, and the remnants of House Tyrell all expressed a willingness to be part of a new political structure that balanced regional autonomy with collective defense and justice. Some suggested a council of lords to work alongside the monarch. Others proposed a more formal coalition with rotating leadership. Daenerys listened, open to compromise, her heart light with relief that the realm was not fracturing into warring states. She did not cling desperately to the vision of absolute rule. She only wanted to ensure that the people who bled on her behalf would never regret it. Jon watched her with a gentle pride in his eyes. He added his voice, "We know well how the wheel of power turns. We must break it. We must seize this opportunity to redefine the Seven Kingdoms, or however many kingdoms choose to stand under one banner." And so, through careful, patient dialogue, much like those first assemblies in Dragonstone, they shaped a realm that was neither entirely feudal nor wholly centralized. Daenerys accepted the title of Queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, but she sanctioned a grand council of representatives from each region to advise her and regulate laws. She decreed that the North and the Iron Islands would enjoy self-governance in most local matters, paying only a nominal tribute to the crown for the defense of the realm. She introduced reforms championed by Tyrion, ensuring that the burdens of war would not fall solely on the small folk. She promised to invest in rebuilding the Riverlands and the Stormlands, battered by years of conflict. She invited the faith to moderate disputes, to avoid the corruption that had plagued the crown in the past. Cersei's reign in King's Landing collapsed soon after the Great War. Her cell's words deserted her when the gold ran out, and the small folk, hearing of Daenerys's victory against the dead, rose against her tyranny. Jaime Lannister, weary of his sister's refusal to see reason, led a small band of loyal knights to open the city gates to the new alliance. Daenerys entered King's Landing not as a conqueror astride a dragon, but as a unifier, escorted by knights from every corner of Westeros who had already bled for each other on the frozen fields of Winterfell. Cersei was taken alive, tried for her crimes in a formal proceeding overseen by the new Grand Council. Some called for her execution, others suggested exile. Daenerys, unwilling to become the tyrant her father had been, listened carefully to the arguments. In the end, the council decided that Cersei would be stripped of titles and lands, confined to a remote keep where she would live out her days under strict guard, never again able to endanger the realm. It was a merciful decision, though controversial, and many doubted she could do any more harm. With King's Landing open to her, Daenerys set about repairing the city's wounds. She toured the crowded streets, speaking with the small folk, ensuring that bread and supplies were distributed. The Red Keep became her seat, but she allowed each region's council members to establish residences in the city so they could attend royal councils regularly. In the throne room, she took the Iron Throne at last, feeling its cold metal press into her back. The hush among the gathered courtiers was thick with anticipation. Yet she recalled every step that had led here, every negotiation, every battle against the undead. Sitting on the throne was not an end, but a beginning. She rose from it and addressed those assembled. "I sit here because we chose unity over division, compassion over fear. This throne will not be the seat of tyranny. It will stand as a testament to those who fought and died so that we might see a new dawn. Let it be a reminder of what we overcame, the long night and the centuries of bloodshed that preceded it." Applause thundered through the hall. Highgarden's banners hung next to Winterfell's direwolf, next to Dorne's spear, the Vale's falcon, the Greyjoy kraken, and the dragon of House Targaryen. The realm was not perfect. There would be arguments, disputes, even betrayals. But the foundation had been laid for a different future. In the following months, Daenerys continued her commitment to rebuilding. She decreed that the farmland ravaged by war be restored, supporting the peasants with loans from the crown's treasury. She oversaw the installation of new roads that would connect the north more efficiently to the southern kingdoms. She introduced a plan to distribute dragonglass weaponry to local garrisons, should any remnant threat of whites appear. She encouraged the citadel to open its doors wider, allowing women and commoners who showed aptitude to study healing and history. She even enlisted the help of the Ironborn to patrol coastal waters for pirates or slavers who might harass the shipping lanes of the Seven Kingdoms. Now that the Great War had passed, some houses chafed at the new structure, but Daenerys found she could defuse tensions by meeting them with calm words rather than threats. Where previous monarchs might have answered with steel, she answered with offers of mediation or invitations to speak before the council. Bit by bit, the realm grew accustomed to the notion that a queen's power did not rely solely on fear. Rumors circulated that the Targaryen queen was the best hope Westeros had known in generations, though, inevitably, some still called her a foreign invader. She took it in stride, recalling the lessons she'd learned leading freed slaves in Meereen. You could not win every heart overnight, but you could guide a society to evolve beyond its old chains. The North remained her strongest ally. Jon Snow, after the victory, returned to help govern the region, visiting King's Landing periodically to advise Daenerys. Their bond, forged in the fires of war, evolved into something deeper. Some whispered of a possible marriage that would unite the North and the Iron Throne once and for all, but Daenerys and Jon, though fond, recognized that their responsibilities came first. Even so, in private, they found solace in each other's presence. Perhaps, in time, such a union would seal the new realm's peace. Months became years, and Westeros experienced an unprecedented period of calm. Not perfect, of course. Bandits still roamed, storms battered the coasts, some lords grumbled about taxes, and there were always old enmities simmering. But Daenerys' approach to governance, shaped by her experiences in Essos and tempered by her alliance with the northern houses, kept the realm from descending into chaos. When rebellions did flare up, she sent envoys first, and only if that failed did she dispatch her dragons. Usually their mere presence was enough to quell insurrection without extensive bloodshed. Across the sea, in the markets of Volantis and Karth, they spoke of the Targaryen queen who had accomplished what Aegon the Conqueror had never truly done, uniting Westeros from within, not just imposing might from without. She was praised as a diplomat, a liberator, though some scoffed at these tales as romantic exaggerations. Still, the caravans carried word that the Seven Kingdoms were more stable than they'd been in living memory. Back in the Red Keep, Daenerys sometimes walked alone in the throne room, remembering the day she first set foot on Dragonstone's shore. She thought of the young girl who had been sold in marriage to Khal Drogo, who had cowered in her brother's shadow. She thought of the woman who had marched on cities in Essos, freeing slaves through fire and blood, learning that the greatest challenge was not conquest but governance. She recalled the moment she had chosen not to burn King's Landing in a rush of dragonfire, but to extend a hand to the great houses instead. Now, in the hush of that great hall, she wondered if her ancestors would recognize her realm, or if they would condemn her for not imposing absolute authority. But she felt no shame in what she had created. She would rather be a queen remembered for preventing bloodshed than one who drowned the realm in it. Standing by a window, looking out on the city below, she saw a bustle of rebuilding. Scaffolds and new homes, a reinvigorated city that was the living proof of her policies. Far beyond, past the glinting waters of Blackwater Bay, lay Dragonstone. Farther still, the rest of Westeros stretched in all directions, held together now not by fear of dragonflame, but by a tapestry of alliances and promises. Some days that tapestry frayed, and she had to weave it anew, but that was ruling. An unending act of creation, of balancing pride and necessity, tradition and change. She did it not alone but with advisors she trusted. Tyrion's counsel, Missandei's insights, Varys's watchful networks, the faith and friendship of the Starks, the steadfast loyalty of the Unsullied. A queen was not a solitary figure, but the sum of those she led. When she ventured into the streets, common folk flocked around her, telling stories of how their harvest had improved since the war, or how their children no longer feared an endless night. Some knelt, some simply gazed in awe at the silver-haired queen. More than once, she saw little girls with doll dragons clutched in their arms, playing at saving the world. Daenerys would stoop to speak with them, remembering how she used to dream of dragons as a child. The cycle had turned, and now those dragons were a symbol not of terror, but of salvation. It was in the 10th year of her reign that a caravan from the east arrived at the gates of the capital, bearing exotic gifts. Tapestries from the Summer Isles, spices from the Jade Sea, even a rare caged manticore. Their leader was an envoy from Meereen, Daenerys' old seat in Essos, who had come to pay homage to the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. He spoke of how Meereen thrived under a council Daenerys had established, and how the city's people regarded her as a savior queen who had freed them from the yoke of slavery. Now they recognized that she had founded a realm across the sea, forging a legacy of unity. The envoy marveled at her continuing influence and offered a chest of polished dragonglass, imported from the mines near New Guise, as a symbol of the bond between Essos and Westeros. Daenerys accepted it with humility, reflecting on how far she had traveled, physically and spiritually, since those days of warfare in the streets of Meereen. That night, she hosted a feast for the envoy in the Red Keep. Lords and ladies from every corner of her kingdom attended, each wearing the sigils of their houses. She gazed upon them in the grand banquet hall, a mosaic of peoples who had once considered themselves enemies. Stormlanders exchanging jests with Ironborn, Dornishmen dancing with Knights of the Vale, Tyrell courtiers sipping wine with Northern bannermen. Music played, hearty laughter resounded, and at the head of the table sat Daenerys, flanked by her allies, smiling at the spectacle. This was the fruit of her labors, a Westeros that had chosen peace, that had learned, if only for a time, to put aside old grudges. She felt gratitude, and a soaring sense of pride that dwarfed any ephemeral rush she might have felt in mere conquest. When the feast ended and the lights burned low, Daenerys lingered in the hall, the strains of music echoing in her mind. Tyrion stood beside her, looking a little tipsy from the wine. "We've come a long way since that night you landed on Dragonstone," he murmured, amusement in his voice. Daenerys turned her gaze to him. "Yes," she agreed softly. "I remember being so anxious, waiting to see if anyone would answer my call. And now, here we are." "You realized something vital that day," Tyrion said, "that the love of the people, the respect of the houses, is worth far more than fear alone. Power grounded in terror withers as soon as someone more frightening appears." Daenerys nodded. "I realized that if I wanted to break the wheel, I couldn't simply spin it in my favor. I had to remake it altogether." They stood in silence a moment, thinking of all the lives lost, the wars fought, the negotiations brokered. Finally, Tyrion raised his goblet, drained the last of his wine, and set it aside. "You have your realm, your grace. May you guide it wisely for many years." She smiled, taking his hand in a rare gesture of intimacy. "Not alone, Lord Tyrion. I will always need my friends." He squeezed her hand before stepping away, leaving her to contemplate the quiet hall. Daenerys breathed in, closing her eyes to better feel the hush. She thought of her dragons, roosting in the skies beyond the city, peaceful for the moment. She thought of the realm's future, of children not yet born who might grow up without the specter of endless war. She thought of the uncertain path that had led her here, of the times she'd nearly succumbed to rage and fire. But in the end, she had chosen another path. And so had Westeros. Through politics, negotiation, and empathy, she had done what once seemed impossible: unite the great houses without a sea of fire. The cost had been high, the journey fraught with danger, and still new challenges would arise. Yet, for the first time in living memory, the realm was healing. And Daenerys Stormborn, first of her name, breaker of chains and mother of dragons, was at its helm, looking not down from a spire of fear, but out across a land bound together by the promise of a better tomorrow. She left the banquet hall and walked out into the night air. Overhead, the stars glittered, and a cool breeze caressed her face. Far below, the city lights twinkled. Ghostly memories of the war lingered in her mind, but they were tempered by the knowledge that every sacrifice had been made for this fragile peace. Holding that hope close, Daenerys lifted her gaze to the horizon, imagining the dawn of a new day and the realm that would awaken with it. Daenerys stepped out into the night air, letting the echoes of the feast fade behind her. The corridors of the Red Keep stood hushed and still, their tapestries swaying in the gentle draft. The stars above King's Landing looked especially bright, as though the gods themselves were peering down upon the newly restored city with silent fascination. Below, she could sense the stirring of nighttime activity, the shuffle of watchmen at their posts, the distant clank of a blacksmith working late, the muffled conversation of late celebrants leaving the feast. She breathed deeply and closed her eyes, recalling the roar of cheers in the banquet hall. A chorus of voices from houses that, only a few years ago, were bent on one another's destruction. Now they feasted side by side. She made her way along the outer walkway, gazing down at the city beyond the walls. It was a soft tapestry of lanterns and moonlight. In the far distance, beyond where the mud gate opened to the Blackwater, the harbor lights glinted on the water's surface. Her mind traveled, as it often did late at night, to memories of Essos, gliding across the sea from Meereen, or the cramped cabin she and her Khalasar had first sailed in after crossing the narrow sea. That felt like a century ago. Yet here she was, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, the realm seemingly at peace at last. A peace she had fought to secure not with dragonfire and devastation, but with words, alliances, compromise, and the promise of something better. A soft footstep behind her drew her attention. She turned to see Missandei approaching, her hands folded at her waist. The Nathi woman dipped her head respectfully but offered a warm smile that wordlessly asked permission to join Daenerys. Daenerys returned the smile, inviting her closer. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply stood side by side, looking across the moonlit sprawl of King's Landing. "Your Grace," Missandei said at last, her voice hushed, "the harbor master has confirmed that the envoys from Meereen will depart at first light. I thought you might wish to send a final word with them." Daenerys nodded, though her gaze remained on the city. "Yes, I'll write a letter tonight. I want to assure the people of Meereen and the other freed cities that Westeros stands ready to trade and share knowledge. So much of what we built in Essos was about freeing slaves and breaking old systems. Here, we have a chance to ensure that no such systems ever take root again." Missandei's eyes flickered with pride. "I'm certain the council in Meereen will be eager to hear how much has changed since your coronation. Even those who worried that you might revert to conquest by fire will see that you followed your own path." Daenerys offered a small, wistful laugh. "I only hope they can't. You to thrive. I left them with a fragile government, but they've proven stronger than I ever dared hope." With a final shared glance, Missandei excused herself, murmuring that she would prepare the quill and parchment. Daenerys lingered a few moments more on the balcony, letting the cool wind caress her cheeks. Tomorrow would be busy. Every day was busy. She would awake to petitions and councils, to the hum of an entire kingdom in the midst of rebuilding. Yet for all the pressures on her, for all the intricacies of ruling, she did not regret the path she had chosen. She returned inside and made her way toward her solar. The Red Keep's corridors still carried the memories of those who had walked them before. Mad King Aerys, the Baratheons, the Lannisters. Perhaps in time those echoes would fade. Perhaps they would always remain. But she was determined that her reign would imprint a gentler memory into these walls. As she passed a pair of unsullied guards, she offered them a polite nod. Their discipline and loyalty were unwavering, but she understood well the cost of that training. She resolved to ensure a life of dignity for them, not endless war. In her solar, she found Missandei waiting, a quill, ink, and parchment arrayed neatly on a table. A single candle cast a warm glow over the polished wood. Daenerys settled into a chair and began dictating a letter to the council in Meereen, offering news of Westeros. She spoke of stable roads, a grand council of lords, and a reformed approach to governance that allowed for regional autonomy. She wrote of how the city might send caravans to King's Landing, or to Gulltown, or to White Harbor without fear of bandits or war. She urged them to keep her informed of any resurgent threats across the sea. Slaver raids? Sellsword companies that might try to fill the vacuum left by her war against the slave cities. Finally, she closed with a personal note of gratitude for those who had believed in her when she was still learning how to rule. By the time she set down the quill, her eyes burned with fatigue. Missandei took the letter, sanded it, then carefully rolled it up and sealed it with the dragon sigil. "I'll see that it is given to the envoys first thing," she said quietly. "Is there anything else you need, Your Grace?" Daenerys shook her head. "Only some rest. And for you too, Missandei. It's been a long day." Missandei inclined her head and departed, leaving Daenerys alone in the flickering candlelight. She took a steadying breath, letting the hush enfold her. On the table near her elbow lay other letters awaiting her attention. Some from minor houses complaining of border disputes, some from ironborn traders with proposals for shipping routes, and one from a newly established faith chapter in the Stormlands requesting royal attendance at a temple dedication. All of it was important, and all of it reminded her that Westeros still needed a guiding hand. She rose, deciding she would address these letters in the morning, and retired to her private chambers, the heavy tapestry curtains rustling as she shut the door. Sleep came swiftly but brought dreams she had experienced before. Half-formed visions of the Red Keep's throne room, where the roof was torn open and snow drifted down over the Iron Throne. A memory twisted into prophecy, perhaps. She saw flashes of dragons, of a snowbound battlefield, of people crying out for help. But the dream lingered only a moment before dissolving, and she fell into a deeper slumber. Morning arrived with the cry of gulls. Daenerys rose, bathed, and dressed in a gown of deep gray edged in white fur. Winter had not quite loosened its hold on the realm, though the most brutal cold had receded. Outside, the sky was a pearly blue, the sunlight glinting off the Blackwater Bay. From her balcony, she watched a Meereenese ship unfurl its sails, drifting into the bright day. She felt a pinch of wistfulness. How long had it been since she'd seen the Great Pyramid of Meereen? She wondered if she would ever cross the narrow sea again. Perhaps one day, if peace in Westeros grew strong enough to allow her the freedom. She made her way to the council chamber, a large hall near the throne room where a round table had been brought in, an echo of King Arthur's tales from beyond their own world. Some might joke, but to Daenerys it simply removed the notion of a seat of honor. They would all sit as equals. She smiled at the memory of Tyrion's suggestion that they adopt a new shape for the table, something less reminiscent of all the sliced throats we've endured. In the end, the artisans had crafted a polished wooden round carved with subtle images of dragons, stags, wolves, and roses, all swirling in intricate patterns. When she entered, her most trusted advisors had already gathered. Tyrion stood with arms crossed, scanning a small sheaf of parchment. Varys waited by the table, wearing his typical neutral expression, though Daenerys had come to read the flickers of curiosity in his eyes. Davos Seaworth, newly made Lord of Rainwood in recognition of his service, was standing near the window, hands clasped behind his back. Grey Worm stood by the door, ever watchful. Ser Brienne of Tarth, who had traveled down from Winterfell for the assembly, rested a gauntlet hand on the back of a chair. Her presence reminded Daenerys of the promises she had made to the north and the importance of forging alliances not just among lords, but among knights and warriors who had won the respect of the people. "Good morning," Daenerys said by way of greeting, taking her seat. The others mirrored her. "What is our first matter?" Tyrion cleared his throat and placed a letter on the table. "We've received a raven from Edric Storm, bastard of King Robert, though he hardly uses that name. He's apparently claimed some portion of the Stormlands with the support of a few lesser lords, and he writes to request formal recognition of his holdings. He also offers an interesting proposition. If we acknowledge his lineage and right to a small keep, he'll pledge his levies and resources to the crown's disposal." It's not a large force, but considering the Stormlands have had a fractured leadership since Stannis' downfall, it might help stabilize the region. Davos perked up at that. Edric Storm, I recall hearing he was spirited away once to keep him from Melisandre's designs. Looks like he's come into his own. I've heard no ill words about the lad. He might do well if he's guided properly. Daenerys considered the letter, her fingertips pressing lightly against the table's carvings. If granting him recognition helps unify the Stormlands without stepping on the rightful claims of House Baratheon's other heirs, though there are scarcely any left, then I see no harm. Have we had any protest from the lords around him? Tyrion shook his head. None that we know of. In fact, it seems some of them are quietly supportive, preferring a stable figure with Baratheon blood over the chaos of potential claimants who've never set foot in Storm's End. We can send a royal charter to confirm him as the Lord of Shipbreaker Bay, or some such title. Daenerys nodded decisively. Yes, draft it, then. Also request that he come to King's Landing for a formal audience if his health and duties allow. I'd like to meet him and ensure he understands the duties that come with any title. She looked around. Agreed. There were murmurs of assent. Ser Davos in particular seemed pleased, remembering the boy's father well, both the good and the ill. Daenerys sensed that for Davos, this was a chance at healing old wounds left by the Baratheon downfall. Next? She asked. Varys stepped forward, smoothing a hand across his robes. A matter from the Reach, Your Grace. The new steward of Highgarden, appointed by the Tyrell cousins, has asked permission to expand trade with Dorne by establishing a direct shipping route along the coast. They propose building new docks near Old Town specifically dedicated to goods from the southern deserts. Wines, spices, exotic fruits. They believe it will enrich both the Reach and Dorne. However, some local lords around Old Town fear it may disrupt the established order of trade by letting Dornish merchants bypass their tariffs. Daenerys smiled lightly, picturing the squabbling of local lords over coin. So, they worry about lost revenue? Varys inclined his head. Precisely. Let's do this, Daenerys said, tapping a finger on the table. Authorize the new docks, but require a small shared port tax that funnels a portion of the revenue back to Old Town's lords. If done fairly, it won't stifle the merchants, but will keep the local houses from feeling cheated. Tyrion chuckled, scribbling notes. Ever the mediator. I'll draft a proposed arrangement that meets both parties halfway. And I'll add a clause that ensures a portion of the collected taxes goes to improving roads for travelers in that region, so everyone sees a tangible benefit. Davos nodded approvingly. It'll be a fine thing if Dorne and the Reach become allies instead of bitter rivals. He paused, glancing at Daenerys. Your Grace, there's another bit of news that might interest you. More rumor than anything confirmed. Word in the street is that Euron Greyjoy has been spotted again off the coast of Lys, amassing ships. Some say he's forging alliances with Volantene traders. Others claim he's got his eyes set on the Stepstones, intending to harass shipping lanes to Westeros. No direct threat yet, but Daenerys felt her jaw tighten. Euron Greyjoy had escaped final judgment after the war with the dead, slipping away during the chaos. He remained a shadow on the horizon of her rule, a relic of the old pillaging ways who had never sworn any oath to her. We cannot ignore him, she said. If Euron is gathering ships, he might be planning to disrupt trade or launch raids on any outlying coastal towns. Yara and Theon have done well curtailing piracy in the Iron Islands, but if Euron is across the sea, that's out of their direct reach. Tyrion pursed his lips. We could dispatch some of our own vessels to the Stepstones to keep watch. Perhaps even coordinate with the royal navies of Dorne or the Vale to ensure those waters are not left unguarded. Daenerys nodded. We'll do that. I'll write to Yara. Let her know we may need Ironborn cooperation beyond the usual patrol routes. If Euron tries to return in force, we'll be ready. I don't want to spark a conflict, but we must protect our shores. Grey Worm spoke for the first time that morning, his voice calm yet resolute. I will prepare the Unsullied stationed in King's Landing to be ready if we must send a detachment by sea. If Euron threatens any part of your realm, we will respond." Daenerys gave him a grateful nod, recalling how many battles they had fought side by side. "Thank you, Grey Worm, but only a small force if absolutely necessary. We must keep the majority here for peacekeeping, not conquest." He inclined his head, satisfied. The council continued for another hour, deliberating minor disputes and upcoming ceremonies. Finally, they adjourned, each counselor heading off to fulfill their assigned tasks. Daenerys remained a moment, glancing at the table once more. She took a breath, recalling how she had once navigated the fractious city-states of Slaver's Bay. That was child's play compared to the sprawl of Westeros, yet the principle was the same. Every action had consequences, and every faction needed to feel acknowledged. She rose and stepped out into the corridor, heading toward the throne room for the open court session, an event she held twice a week so that commoners and minor lords could bring their pleas directly to the crown. The throne room was no longer as daunting or full of fear as it had been under the Mad King or Cersei. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the Iron Throne but also the benches arranged before it. Daenerys took her seat on the throne, mindful of the swords that jutted from its fused metal. The lords and ladies of her newly formed court assembled on either side, while commoners queued at the foot of the hall. 2 Kingsguard knights, each chosen for their honor rather than mere birth, flanked the throne. Daenerys had revived the order with new standards, determined that it not be tarnished by the corruption of the past. One by one, petitioners stepped forward. A fisherman from Crackclaw Point complained that a local petty lord was charging double taxes. Daenerys listened, then promised to look into it, dispatching a royal official to investigate. Next, a traveling minstrel asked permission to perform in the city squares for coin. She granted it readily, insisting that the only fee be a nominal one to ensure public order. Another brought a dispute over farmland boundaries near Hayford, and Daenerys asked that both sides present their maps. Tyrion, standing by, quipped that they might need a more precise royal surveyor. Daenerys agreed, resolving to fund a small team to clarify land rights in the Crownlands. Such were the day-to-day tasks of queenship. It lacked the immediate thrill of commanding dragons in battle, yet Daenerys had come to appreciate these smaller gestures. Each hearing was a chance to reinforce that her rule was grounded in fairness. She saw how the petitioners left, some grumbling, some relieved, but all acknowledging that the queen had listened. And if any among them spread the word that she was an attentive, impartial judge, so much the better. Toward midday, the court session ended. Daenerys was about to rise when a final figure stepped forward, a broad-shouldered man wearing simple traveling clothes. He bowed low, removing a leather cap. "Your Grace," he said, voice resonating in the cavernous hall. "I beg pardon for this intrusion, but I've traveled from the Trident with news. There are rumors, sightings, of whites in the deep forests there." The hall's hush grew palpable, as if everyone collectively held their breath. The Great War had been won, the Night King destroyed, but the memories of the undead still haunted Westeros. Daenerys leaned forward, heart pounding. "Tell me everything." The man shifted uneasily. "I cannot swear it's true, but villagers near the Blue Fork claim they've seen pale shapes in the night. Cattle go missing, sometimes found half-eaten. A young shepherd vanished. Then there's the matter of a corpse that washed up on the riverbank, its flesh all gray and riddled with black veins." A chill settled over the throne room. Daenerys exchanged a glance with Tyrion, who looked equally concerned. She turned back to the man. "Did you see any of these creatures yourself?" He shook his head. "No, Your Grace, only heard the tales. But the people are frightened, especially in smaller hamlets without real walls." Daenerys exhaled slowly, remembering the undead horrors on the fields of Winterfell. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I will send scouts to the area, men who know how to identify the signs. For now, tell your people that the crown is aware, and they are not alone." The man bowed deeply, relief flickering across his face. "Thank you, Your Grace," he murmured before stepping away. As the throne room cleared, Daenerys called Tyrion and Davos to her side, speaking in low tones. We need to verify this. The Night King was destroyed, and the bulk of the undead army collapsed. But if any pockets of whites remain, we must deal with them swiftly. Davos rubbed the stubble on his chin. We can't dismiss it. After the army of the dead fell, some scattered remnants might have survived. Remember the stories we heard of lone whites persisting in the far corners? Tyrion nodded. We'll need a task force that understands how to fight them. Dragonglass weapons, perhaps a few of the seasoned warriors who faced them at Winterfell. And if necessary, a dragon or two could be dispatched. Daenerys felt a pang of worry. Drogon and Rhaegal do not relish colder climates. But the riverlands aren't as frigid as the north. If it proves necessary, I'll have to go myself. We'll do everything to ensure the dead do not rise again in this realm. They agreed on a plan. Dispatch a small team of loyal soldiers, some from the north who had direct experience, and an officer from the Unsullied to keep discipline. They would carry dragonglass-dipped spears and examine the area thoroughly. If it turned out to be local bandits and wild animals, so be it. If it was something darker, they would send word back immediately. That set, Daenerys released her council for the midday meal, though her appetite had withered. She moved toward the gardens behind the Red Keep, seeking a moment of quiet reflection. The gardens were filled with winter-blooming roses and hardy shrubs, the air scented with cold earth. A slender path led to a vantage overlooking the city's southwestern walls. Daenerys paused there, leaning on a low stone railing, letting her mind wander through the troubles that might still lurk in Westeros. She had defeated the greatest threat that any living person had known, but victory did not mean complacency. Indeed, every day reminded her that leadership was an unending tapestry, each thread a challenge, each moment an opportunity for unraveling or strengthening. She heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Jon Snow approaching, looking travel-stained but resolute. Her heart gave a little leap. He had not told her he was returning so soon. Behind him, a few northern guards hovered at a respectful distance, letting their lord pass unhindered. Daenerys stepped forward, a gentle smile brightening her expression. Jon bowed his head, though there was no formality in his voice when he spoke. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, meeting her gaze. "We made good time from Winterfell. Sansa sent her regards and Arya as well. They've been reorganizing the fortress, making sure the winter stores are replenished." Daenerys inclined her head. "You're always welcome here. I hope the roads are not too treacherous. How is the north faring?" He shrugged slightly. "The snows are melting slowly. It's still cold, but we've seen worse. Many of the lords are turning their attention to rebuilding holdfasts ravaged by the army of the dead. But morale is high. They don't forget that you stood with them. Some still question a Targaryen on the throne, but far fewer than before." She offered him a small, self-conscious smile. "I can understand that. Come, walk with me." She gestured along the garden path, and he fell into step beside her. His cloak brushed the gravel, and she noted a new scar on his right hand, crossing the knuckles. "A new mark?" she asked quietly. He glanced down. "A slight accident in training. Gendry convinced me to test a new type of sword. I misjudged the grip." There was an undertone of humor in his voice. "But I heal quickly enough." They walked in companionable silence for a time, letting the wind rustle the hedges. Daenerys found her thoughts returning to the rumor of whites in the riverlands. She recounted it to Jon, who listened with a grave expression. "We can't ignore any sign," he said firmly. "I thought we were done with them, but it would be foolish to assume none survived in some dark corner." "Agreed. I've sent men to investigate," Daenerys replied, glancing up at him. "I'd rather it be a false alarm than risk ignoring something so dire." Jon nodded, sliding his hands behind his back. "I can send a few northern scouts to join them if you like. Some of the free folk who came south of the wall have sharpened senses when it comes to the dead, like Tormund, though he's mostly in the far north with Ghost. But others remain around Winterfell. They'd be glad to help." Daenerys found herself comforted by the offer. "Yes, please do. The more we coordinate, the better." She paused by a small reflecting pool, its surface glassy and still. "How long do you plan to stay in King's Landing?" she asked, turning her head to meet his gaze. He offered a half-smile. "A few weeks, if you don't mind. Sansa can manage Winterfell, and I wanted to spend time here, see how the realm is shaping under our new system. Also, I hope to speak with you about certain issues between the North and the Crown. Nothing pressing, just details of trade and the next round of taxes." Daenerys' smile softened. "Jon Snow, you may stay as long as you wish, and I appreciate that you want to consult on these matters. The North's perspective is vital." They resumed walking, each step bringing them to a more private corner of the garden. Daenerys felt a warmth in her chest. Their bond, forged through trials in the North, had matured into mutual respect and a quiet understanding. Some might call it affection. In the months since the victory over the Night King, they had seen little of each other due to the demands of governance. Yet here he was, returning to offer help, and she realized how much she valued that presence. She was about to speak again when the sound of heavier footsteps reached them. Grey Worm approached with measured strides, saluting. "Your Grace, there is a matter that requires your attention in the yard." Daenerys nodded, and with an apologetic glance at Jon, followed Grey Worm out of the garden. In the castle courtyard, a commotion had gathered. A line of disheveled men and women in shackles stood by a wagon, surrounded by guards wearing the golden cloaks of the city watch. One guard with a plumed helmet approached Daenerys, face grim. "Your Grace," the guard began. "These are the remnants of a smuggler crew we caught trying to sneak shipments of Sorrow's Mist into Flea Bottom." Daenerys frowned. She recalled that Sorrow's Mist was a potent, dangerous narcotic that had begun to surface in underground markets after the war. She crossed her arms. "Where did they bring it from?" The guard gestured to the wagon. "We found crates with markings from Lys. Seems that they were attempting to unload them quietly along the shores outside King's Landing, then cart them in. Some are desperate for coin, and Sorrow's Mist sells for high prices among certain circles." Daenerys studied the captives. Their eyes flicked with fear. Some glared defiantly, others stared at the ground in shame. "You'll be detained until we've fully examined your cargo," she announced, raising her voice for all to hear. "If found guilty of endangering the citizens with illicit substances, you will face the consequences. If your involvement was coerced or ignorant, we will hear your pleas." She turned to Grey Worm. "Have them locked up under guard. We'll conduct a proper investigation." Grey Worm barked an order, and the guards led the prisoners off. Daenerys surveyed the crates, prying one open to see small ceramic vials inside, the fluid swirling ominously. Some said it could kill a man with a single drop or drive him into madness. She felt a surge of anger. Peace had not rid the realm of greed or cruelty. It merely changed its shape. Jon, who had followed her, stood behind, his expression stern. "That stuff causes nightmares, if the stories are true." "Yes," Daenerys said, letting the lid fall closed. "We'll destroy these shipments once the investigation is done. But I need to trace the source. Someone in Lys is funneling these poisons here. If Euron or other enemies are involved, it could be part of a larger plan to destabilize the city. Or it could just be crime lords seeking profit." Jon placed a hand on her shoulder, a brief, comforting gesture. "You'll handle it. You've handled worse." She glanced back at him with gratitude, then gestured for Grey Worm to oversee the rest. Their day had hardly begun, and already the shadow of illicit trade threatened the city. But in her time in Meereen, she had confronted such challenges. She would do so again here, ensuring that criminals did not exploit the vulnerable. The wheel turned, and each time, she had to meet it with unwavering resolve. The hours that followed were a whirlwind. Letters to be written to the city magistrates in Lys, inquiries to be made among the harbor masters, the reissuing of a royal decree that any vessels carrying contraband would be seized, and their owners punished. By late afternoon, Daenerys found a brief respite in the small council chamber, where Tyrion was finalizing a letter to Edric Storm. A page had come from the kitchens with a pitcher of water and a plate of bread, cheese, and apples, which she gratefully accepted. Tyrion paused his scribbling long enough to seize a slice of apple for himself. At one point, a swirl of cloaks announced the arrival of several Stormlands lords who had come to voice their opinions on Edric Storm's recognition. Daenerys invited them to speak. One older man with a bristling gray beard grumbled that Edric had no true legitimacy. Another, a younger knight, pointed out that there were no undisputed Baratheon heirs left and that Edric was of Robert's blood. Daenerys let them debate while she observed. Eventually, she interjected. The crown is not in the habit of sowing chaos among loyal lords. If Edric Storm commands the loyalty of the local people, if he can maintain peace, then that is enough for me to extend recognition. However, if he fails in his duties, I have no qualms about reconsidering. That simple statement seemed to pacify both sides. They left with measured bows, apparently mollified that Daenerys did not intend to force them under a lord they detested but would indeed uphold Edric's position if he proved himself worthy. When they were gone, Tyrion rubbed his temples, chuckling wryly. So many claimants, so many complicated successions. I sometimes think we should track the genealogies in a single monstrous ledger. But it would weigh as much as an ox. Daenerys's lips quirked. We'll manage. The realm is calmer now than it's been in generations. We can afford the occasional debate about legitimacy. The next day brought a fresh flurry of visitors, including a delegation from the Vale. They were led by Lord Robin Arryn's steward, Lord Grafton of Gulltown, who bore documents attesting that their young lord was in the best health he'd ever been, thanks to careful tutoring and martial training from experienced knights. The Vale was stable, but there had been a minor revolt in the mountain clans. Daenerys encouraged them to resolve it through negotiated treaties where possible, offering farmland or safe passage, rather than immediate violence. Lord Grafton seemed skeptical, but Tyrion, recalling the use of compromise, insisted that the clans might be more cooperative if they were treated as potential allies rather than lawless savages. The conversation ended amicably, with Daenerys promising to send a token delegation to help mediate. It was that evening, when the sun was sinking over the city, that the first raven arrived back from the riverlands. Daenerys was in her solar with Jon, Tyrion, and Grey Worm, reviewing a city map that showed suspected contraband routes. A rapping at the door preceded a page entering with a sealed scroll. Daenerys took it, noting the wax impression of the crown's scouts. She broke the seal, scanning the parchment quickly, her breath catching at the words. They found footprints, she said, voice hushed. Signs of something unnatural. The bodies of 2 sheep drained of blood, and a half-decayed corpse that tried to rise when they touched it. Jon leaned in, jaw taut. So it's true. She read on. They burned it, and it went down like any white. No sign of a White Walker, but the scouts suspect there could be more roaming the forest. They're requesting reinforcements to comb the area thoroughly and ensure no pockets remain. Tyrion swore under his breath. Grey Worm's expression darkened. Daenerys felt a coil of fear tighten in her stomach. All right, she said, exhaling. We move quickly. I'll dispatch a larger force. We'll have them scour every village, every forest glade. Jon crossed his arms. I'll lead them. I have experience with whites. And if we need to coordinate with the north, I'm a natural messenger. Daenerys hesitated, recalling how close Jon had come to death fighting the dead. Are you certain? He nodded, resolute. We can't let them spread. If a single white kills another and reanimates it, it could multiply. We must contain it now. She glanced at Tyrion, who gave her a concerned shrug, as if to say this was Jon's decision. Grey Worm said nothing, but Daenerys could see the readiness in his posture. He would fight wherever needed. Finally, she nodded. All right. I'll provide you with a detachment of Unsullied. We'll gather volunteers from the knights who fought at Winterfell and any other men with experience. I'll remain here to govern and keep an eye on the contraband issue, but I'll be prepared to bring the dragons if you send word that the threat is more serious. Jon bowed his head. Thank you. We'll root them out. A plan took shape swiftly. A force of roughly 100 warriors would march or ride to the riverlands. Among them were a handful of northern fighters who had faced the undead, along with a small contingent of Unsullied, Dothraki scouts. Many still roamed the continent under Daenerys' banner, and a few knights from the Crownlands. They would link up with local lords to coordinate a search. Jon would act as overall commander, with an officer of the Unsullied second in command. Davos volunteered to go as well, though he admitted he was not the best fighter. "But I can at least help with logistics and keep the men supplied," he said. Daenerys accepted with relief, knowing Davos's calm presence often prevented needless quarrels. Within 2 days, the company was assembled in the city's main courtyard. Daenerys stood on a raised step to bid them farewell. Banners fluttered in the crisp wind, the Stark direwolf among them, the Targaryen dragon, and several lesser sigils. The men wore a mix of furs, leathers, and steel. Jon's cloak was a deep charcoal, clasped at the shoulder by a silver wolf's head. Davos wore sturdy traveling clothes, leaning on a staff as he organized the supply carts. Daenerys moved down the line, exchanging words of encouragement, checking that the dragonglass weapons were well secured. When she reached Jon, she paused, meeting his eyes. "Take no chances. If it's more dangerous than we suspect, send a raven, and I'll come with Drogon and Regal." He dipped his head. "I will, but hopefully it won't come to that." He hesitated, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "Keep yourself safe here, too. The city might have its own troubles." She nodded, remembering the Sorrow's missed shipments and the specter of Euron. "I will. Good luck, Jon Snow." They shared a brief, unspoken moment of affection before duty pulled them apart. Daenerys stepped back, and Jon signaled the march. The gates swung open, and the host departed King's Landing. Daenerys remained watching until the last rider was gone from view, a sense of unease gnawing at her. She turned away and found Grey Worm at her side. He offered a small bow. "Your Grace, there are matters that need your attention in the throne room. Some of the city's guild leaders have arrived." "Very well," she said, swallowing her concern for Jon and the new threat. "Let's not keep them waiting." She resumed her role as queen, forcing her mind to the tasks at hand. But all the while, her thoughts drifted north and west, to the riverlands, praying that the white sightings were isolated, that the dead would not rise again to haunt the living. For half a year, she had savored a realm free of that monstrous dread. It seemed the old ghosts still lingered, refusing to go quietly. The following week was marked by intensifying efforts to root out the Sorrow's mistrade in King's Landing. Daenerys authorized the City Watch to search suspicious warehouses and impound questionable cargo. Unsavory rumors pointed to a small but organized network that funneled the drug from the free cities. Several fishmongers near the Mudgate insisted they had seen suspicious ships anchored offshore at night, though they could not identify them. Tyrion suggested stepping up the presence of the royal fleet along the coast, while Varys set his whisperers to investigating who in lists might be behind these operations. Meanwhile, ravens came from Jon's expedition almost daily. At first, they reported slow progress. The men had found only a few traces of the undead. They had destroyed 2 lone whites skulking in a forest near the Blue Fork. No sign of a larger group. Then, several days later, the tone turned grim. A farmstead near the Tumblestone had been attacked, the occupants slaughtered. The footprints and method of attack suggested the dead, not mere bandits. Jon's forces pursued the creatures, cornering them in a half-ruined mill. A fierce fight ensued, and though the whites were dispatched, 3 men were killed, 2 more wounded. The letter ended with Jon's vow to scour the region thoroughly. Daenerys read it with clenched teeth, wishing she could be there. But a queen's place was also here, ensuring the realm remained unified. A final letter came after another week, bearing better news. The group believed they had destroyed the last pocket of whites. With the help of local lords, they had burned any corpse that showed signs of reanimation. Davos wrote a terse postscript that read, "We've hopefully seen the last of this filth." Daenerys breathed a sigh of relief at that. She prayed there were no further infestations lurking. Jon's letter also mentioned that he would remain in the Riverlands another fortnight to ensure stability before returning. That gave her some comfort. If he thought the situation dire, he would have summoned her or come back sooner. In King's Landing, life pressed on. The markets bustled, the springtime sun warming the city. People who had fled during the war began to return, rebuilding shops or opening new ones. Daenerys walked among them sometimes, flanked by a light guard, letting the small folk see her face, assuring them she was no distant, aloof ruler. She offered small acts of kindness, distributing bread to an orphanage, donating coins to repair a leaky roof in Flea Bottom. It might have seemed trivial, but after so many years of tyranny, small gestures could mend wide rifts. She took counsel with the Faith, who had started to reestablish itself in King's Landing. The High Sparrow's extremist movement was gone, but a more moderate network of Septons and Septas had grown in its place. Daenerys supported them, provided they refrained from imposing their beliefs through fear or violence. She spoke with the new High Septon, an elderly, soft-spoken man named Septon Maribald, about ways the Faith might help feed the poor or heal the sick. He was more than willing, grateful that the crown recognized the Faith's charitable role. However, he gently cautioned that many devout people still harbored distrust toward a Targaryen queen, especially one known to command dragons. Daenerys assured him she would never use her dragons to harm the innocent. She thanked him for his candor and vowed to maintain open dialogue. All the while, letters trickled in from the corners of the realm, speaking of quiet progress. Yara Greyjoy reported that she had increased patrols around the Stepstones, though no sign of Euron's fleet had yet emerged. The Vale's new approach to the mountain clans was bearing fruit. One clan had agreed to a treaty in exchange for safe passage and a portion of farmland near the foothills. Edric Storm wrote that he was settling comfortably into Storm's End, receiving visitors who seemed eager to see the Baratheon line, even if somewhat distant, restored in some capacity. The Tyrell cousins in Highgarden continued to rebuild alliances with smaller reach houses, aiming for a stable harvest next season. In short, a tapestry of cautious optimism. When Jon at last returned to King's Landing, nearly a month after his departure, Daenerys stood on the Red Keep steps to greet him. His host looked tired, some with bandaged wounds, but their eyes were clear and their banners flew high. Davos rode beside Jon, waving to a few townsfolk who recognized him. Upon dismounting, Jon offered Daenerys a short bow. She stepped forward, smiling, and extended her hand. He took it, and they exchanged the briefest of glances that spoke volumes of relief. The courtyard bustled as the men dispersed to rest or stable their horses. Jon accompanied Daenerys inside, where Missandei had arranged a tray of mulled wine. They retreated to a private solar, joined by Tyrion and Davos, to hear the full account. "It was worse than we initially thought," Jon began, sipping the wine, "but we managed to contain it. We scoured hamlets near the Trident, the Tumblestone, the Blue Fork. Everywhere we found whites, we burned them. We ended up discovering a small cavern system that seemed to be a nest of sorts. Bodies that either turned or were stored there. We destroyed them all. No sign of any White Walkers reanimating them, but it was clearly leftover magic, if that's the right word." Daenerys shivered inwardly. "Are you certain you rooted them all out?" He nodded, though he looked weary. "As certain as we can be. We spoke with local villagers, had them watch for any sign of strange corpses. If a body doesn't decay naturally, they'll burn it immediately and send word. I've asked a handful of soldiers to remain behind, just in case." Tyrion leaned forward. "No sign of any orchestrated presence, then? Just scattered remnants?" Jon shrugged. "It seems so. The Night King is gone, and the White Walkers with him, but some whites remained. Maybe there are more out there, but if so, we'll keep watch." Daenerys exhaled slowly. "We'll need to remain vigilant across the entire realm. I'll send word to the lords in each region. If they find any sign of these creatures, they must burn them immediately." Davos, swirling his cup of wine, added, "The fear we saw among the small folk is still raw. Some lived through the war. Others only heard stories, but they're frightened enough that a single rumor of a white can send half a village fleeing. But if we keep them informed, reassure them that the crown knows how to handle the threat, that might prevent panic." She agreed, grateful that so many leaders were working together. The conversation shifted to logistical details, the men who died, the cost of replacements for gear, the ongoing need for dragonglass distribution. An hour passed before Davos and Tyrion took their leave. Then it was only Daenerys and Jon, the tension of the recent crisis easing from their shoulders. She looked at him, noting the lines of fatigue at his eyes, the faint smudge of dirt still on his cheek. "Thank you," she said softly, "for leading that expedition. I know it can't have been easy revisiting those horrors." He set down his cup. "I'd do it again to protect these people. It doesn't matter if they're in the north or the riverlands. The dead threaten all the living." A quiet moment settled between them. Outside, the sun was lowering, casting golden slants of light across the solar. She felt that same warmth stirring in her chest, the pull of a man who had proven himself time and again. In another life, perhaps they would have had time to explore that connection more openly, free from the burdens of rulership. But each had a kingdom or near enough to guide 1,000 rise each day. Jon's gaze flicked around the room. "How have things been here?" he asked. "Any new trouble from Cersei's loyalists?" She shook her head. "No, her holdouts have mostly scattered. Many bent the knee when they saw that the realm stands with me. Cersei herself remains exiled under guard, and from what I hear, she rages at her confinement. But the castle she's in is nigh impenetrable." Tyrion suggested a location near the edge of the Westerlands, far from the capital. A ghost of a smile touched Jon's lips. "It seems a kinder fate than she would have afforded any of us." Daenerys had to agree. She rose, moving toward the window. Below, she could see the courtyard, men drifting to and fro, the red bricks tinted by the setting sun. "I often wonder if it was too merciful," she admitted. "But I promised myself I would not become another tyrant." Jon joined her at the window, standing close enough that she felt the warmth of his presence. "You made the right choice," he said. "If we start executing everyone who wronged us, we become them. And you didn't come here to follow that path." She glanced up at him. "No, I didn't." For a heartbeat, their eyes held. She saw the flicker of something unspoken in his gaze, a question left unanswered. The press of their shared burdens weighed it down. She felt her heart pound, memories flashing of battles fought shoulder to shoulder, of nights spent planning how to save the realm. Maybe they deserved a measure of happiness. But was it possible amid all the demands of rule? Before either could speak, a polite knock sounded at the door, and Missandei's voice followed. "Your Grace? Apologies, but there's an urgent raven from Storm's End." Daenerys sighed, stepping back from the window as if releasing a dream. "Yes, come in." Missandei entered with a sealed scroll. Jon stepped aside, giving Daenerys room to read. She opened it, quickly scanning the lines. "It's from Edric Storm. He's encountered some trouble with a band of sellswords that landed in the Stormlands. No direct confrontation yet, but they're allegedly under contract to some merchant from Essos. They've been wandering the countryside and refusing local authority." Jon frowned. "Sellswords could be nothing, or could be more of this list threat you're dealing with." Daenerys agreed. "We'll need to send a message that unauthorized military forces are not permitted to roam freely. If they want to register as a mercenary company under the Crown's oversight, they can. Otherwise, they must leave or face consequences." She glanced at Jon, an unspoken question in her eyes. He nodded. "I'll write to Edric, see what he needs. Or if you prefer, I can ride down there, help him handle it." She felt a stab of guilt at the idea of sending him off again so soon. "You've only just returned. We can send someone else." Jon managed a half-smile. "Better someone with experience, though, but let's see how it unfolds. I won't rush off unless it's truly necessary." With that, the moment of near intimacy had passed, replaced once more by the realm's demands. Daenerys rubbed her temples, exhaustion creeping in. "Thank you, Jon. And thank you, Missandei. Let Edric know we acknowledge his concerns and stand ready to support him, but ask for more details on these sellswords." Missandei nodded, slipping out as quickly as she came. Daenerys set the scroll aside, then turned back to Jon. "Stay a while," she said, voice gentle. "Rest. We can face the next storms tomorrow." He gave a slight bow of his head, his eyes softening. "Thank you." Then he left her solar, presumably to find a chamber or speak with his men. Daenerys stood there in silence for several heartbeats, trying to reconcile the swirl of feelings in her chest. The door closed behind him, and she leaned against the window frame, gazing at the sky. Every day demanded so much of them. Perhaps it was enough simply to share this purpose. Perhaps the realm's well-being was the only union they truly needed. Yet in her quieter moments, Daenerys could not deny that she longed for closeness, for someone who understood every triumph and sorrow without her needing to explain. She wondered if, one day, she could set aside the burdens of the Iron Throne, even for a little while, and simply be Daenerys. That time had not yet come. She returned to the scattering of scrolls on her table, letting her mind sink into the comfort of tasks. After drafting a swift response to Edric, she dictated a short letter to the newly formed council in Meereen, updating them on the Soros Mist situation and urging them to be vigilant. Finally, she penned a note to Yara Greyjoy, requesting an update on patrols near the Stepstones. Only then did she allow herself a meal and a few hours of much-needed rest. Morning arrived with a sky that promised rain. Daenerys awoke, bathed, and dressed in a simpler gown than her usual queenly attire, a fitted black bodice with a high collar, accompanied by a burgundy skirt. She had found that dressing too ostentatiously kept her apart from her people, and she wanted them to see her as approachable. Nonetheless, the Targaryen dragon sigil was embroidered on her collar, a reminder of her heritage and the promise she made to defend Westeros. Her first task was to meet with Tyrion and Varys in a small reading room lined with shelves of old ledgers and maps. Grey Worm stood at the door, silent as ever. Tyrion looked up from a parchment as she entered. "Your Grace, we've news from Lys. One of my contacts suggests that a wealthy trader, Styrios Nawar, has been sponsoring voyages to smuggle all manner of contraband, including Soros Mist. It's rumored he has ties to pirates who operate around the Stepstones. He might even have had dealings with Euron Greyjoy." Daenerys felt her brow furrow. "Do we have enough proof to confront him officially?" Varys shook his head. "Not solid proof. Just rumors, signs, whispers. He's careful. And Lys is not exactly known for its transparent legal system. If we go accusing him without evidence, we might spark conflict with the Lyseni authorities, or he might bribe his way out of trouble." Tyrion sighed. "We could try to intercept his ships. If we catch them red-handed, that would give us leverage. But that would also require stationing a blockade or patrolling the main routes thoroughly." Daenerys tapped her fingertips against the table, thinking, "Let's do this quietly. Increase patrols on our side. If we catch a ship carrying contraband, we interrogate the captain. We gather enough evidence to name Styrios Nawar in an official complaint. Then we can demand Lys hand him over, or at least shut down his operations." Varys offered a small nod. "I'll also instruct my whisperers to dig deeper into his dealings. Perhaps we'll unearth something that can't be swept aside by bribes." "That's our path, then," Daenerys said. "We won't let him poison our people for profit." Her voice carried a steely undertone. She had seen how unscrupulous merchants operated in Essos, and she would not let them turn King's Landing into a pit of addiction and despair. The day continued in a blur of audiences and decisions, ratifying a new set of trade regulations for the Arbor's wine exports, approving repairs on a damaged bridge near Riverrun, discussing the possibility of establishing a formal alliance with the free folk of the far north, who mostly roamed beyond the rebuilt wall now. Daenerys found that last topic especially interesting. Tormund Giantsbane had once jokingly told her she was strong enough to be a wildling queen, and she admired the free folk's independence. Jon had always said they were staunch allies if treated with respect. Perhaps forging a lasting bond would provide an extra measure of security against any future threat from beyond the wall. Evening brought another letter from Edric Storm, who reported that the Sellswords claimed to be mercenaries traveling to Dorne to seek new contracts. They had not caused trouble aside from refusing to yield to local authority. Edric was uncertain if they were truly heading to Dorne or scouting the Stormlands for weaknesses. Daenerys penned a cautionary response. "Keep them under observation, ensure they pay for supplies, and if they commit any violent act, arrest them. She considered dispatching a royal envoy but decided to wait, letting Edric's leadership be tested. If he succeeded, it would strengthen his position among the Stormlords. 2 weeks passed in this manner, Daenerys deftly balancing the daily minutiae of governance with the looming threats. Small pockets of whites, contraband from Lys, rumors of Euron Greyjoy's maneuvers. She dined with Jon more often in the evenings, though it was usually a working supper with Tyrion, Davos, or Brienne. On rare occasions, they managed a private moment. A walk along the castle walls, a quiet conversation under the starlight. The tension between them was no longer purely political, but the demands of the realm left little space for them to explore it fully. Daenerys accepted that for now, though she caught herself wondering how it might change when the kingdom stabilized completely, if it ever did. A subtle change in King's Landing's atmosphere crept in as spring advanced. The city's mood grew lighter, the markets filled with fresh produce from the surrounding farmland. More travelers arrived, some from distant corners of Westeros, some from Essos, eager to see the new Queen's court. Entertainers set up stages in squares, performing body plays lampooning old lords or celebrating the Queen of Dragons. Daenerys caught wind of one play that dramatized her landing in Westeros, portraying her as a righteous savior who tamed fire to protect the weak. She had Tyrion investigate to ensure it wasn't seditious in disguise. He returned with a wry grin, reporting it was utterly unsubtle but mostly flattering. Daenerys chuckled, deciding she need not shut down a bit of harmless theater. It was during this season of cautious optimism that a large party from the north arrived, led by Sansa Stark herself. Daenerys greeted her in the courtyard. The Lady of Winterfell was clad in a heavy cloak of dark blue velvet trimmed with white fur, her red hair braided in a crown-like loop. She offered Daenerys a respectful curtsy, then greeted her brother Jon warmly with a long embrace. With her came several northern lords, including Lord Glover and Lady Mormont, though the latter was a girl no longer, but a young woman, fierce as ever. Daenerys arranged for a splendid welcome feast that evening. Tables in the great hall groaned under roasted game, fresh bread, and barrels of northern ale. The Targaryen banner hung alongside the Stark direwolf, a sight that would have been unimaginable a decade earlier. Lords from across Westeros attended, mingling in celebration. The hum of conversation filled the air, occasionally punctuated by laughter or the clink of tankards. Daenerys sat at the head table, with Sansa on her right and Tyrion on her left, Jon next to Sansa. She found herself impressed by Sansa's poise and quiet authority. This was a woman who had endured terrible ordeals and emerged stronger. As the feast wound down, Sansa leaned toward Daenerys, speaking softly so only she would hear. King's Landing has changed since I last saw it. The people seem happier, or at least not as downtrodden. You've done well. Daenerys felt a glow of pride. Thank you. I had helped Jon, Tyrion, and many others, but I'm trying to be the Queen Westeros needs, not a conqueror. Sansa nodded, sipping her wine. I see that. When I arrived, I half expected to sense fear in the streets. Instead, I see a cautious hope. Perhaps it will hold. It will hold, Daenerys said firmly, though she did not underestimate the challenges ahead. Sansa offered a slight smile. I believe you. Then, after a pause, she added, Arya sends her regards. She's traveling the north, patrolling for any signs of the undead, though we believe we vanquished them. She never did enjoy courtly gatherings. Daenerys chuckled at the thought of the young assassin prowling the wilds. No, I suppose she wouldn't. As cups were refilled and musicians struck up another tune, Daenerys felt a rare moment of genuine ease. She surveyed the hall, Gendry joking with the North's lords, Yara Greyjoy in conversation with a Stormlands knight, Tyrion regaling Sansa with some anecdote. Across the table, Jon caught her eye and gave a nod, a subtle acknowledgement of shared triumph. The realm was not perfect, but they had come so far. By the following morning, however, governance called them back to their duties. Sansa had brought a stack of proposals from the north, ranging from trade routes to shared law enforcement. Daenerys invited her to a council meeting with Tyrion, Varys, and Jon. They spread maps across the table, using markers to outline new roads that could speed travel between Winterfell and the southern kingdoms. Sansa insisted that the North should have the right to collect tolls on those roads, which Tyrion countered with a suggestion that half those tolls go into a central fund to maintain the route. Daenerys moderated gently, ensuring neither side felt slighted. By midday, they had forged a workable agreement. After a light lunch, talk turned to the overall structure of the Grand Council. In the aftermath of the war, Daenerys had appointed representatives from each region, but it was a loose arrangement. Sansa proposed formalizing it. Each region, North, Vale, Riverlands, Westerlands, Reach, Stormlands, Crownlands, Iron Islands, and Dorne, would choose a council member to advise the crown. They would convene seasonally or when summoned for urgent matters. It would be akin to the old small council, but with a broader representation. Daenerys found the idea appealing. Tyrion noted that it could be complicated to coordinate so many voices, but on balance, it would solidify the sense that all regions had a say in the governance. With some refinements, Daenerys approved. As the day wore on, Daenerys excused herself for a short break, stepping out onto the Red Keep's ramparts. A sea breeze lapped at her face, bringing the tang of salt. Below, the city sprawled in the late afternoon light, its winding streets carrying the bustle of trade and life. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Sansa approach. The two women stood in silence a moment, looking out over the rooftops. "You've done a remarkable job," Sansa said quietly. "Truly," Daenerys smiled. "I won't pretend it's easy. Every day there's a new crisis or a rumor, but I have good people around me." Sansa let out a soft hum. "I spent years in King's Landing when I was younger. It was a place of secrets, manipulation, horrors lurking behind every door. Now it seems, well, not free of intrigue, but calmer. It suits you." Daenerys ran a hand along the stone merlin. "I've tried to show them another way, ruling through justice, not fear." She glanced at Sansa. "And you, how fares Winterfell truly? You speak of roads and trade, but are the people faring well?" The Lady of Winterfell nodded. "They are. We have enough food, the lords are loyal, and we see fewer bandits each day. The scars of the war remain, but they heal. The biggest challenge is forging unity among the northern houses, some of which lost entire family lines. We're also cooperating more with the Night's Watch to ensure no wild threat crosses the wall again. But it's a slow process." Daenerys admired the woman's forthrightness. She thought of how they'd once stood at odds, Sansa wary of a Targaryen queen. Now they spoke as peers. A sense of mutual respect bound them. They talked a while longer, reflecting on what they had survived. Then Sansa excused herself to confer with the northern retinue, leaving Daenerys alone once more. In the subsequent days, more pieces fell into place. The new Grand Council of Westeros was formally declared, with each region naming a representative. They would gather at the capital at least twice a year or whenever summoned for pressing matters. Sansa agreed to serve as the North's representative, though she would appoint a deputy when she was needed at Winterfell. Tyrion remained Daenerys' hand, and Varys her master of whispers, but now their roles would involve coordinating with the council more than dictating policy from a narrow clique. Once word spread of this arrangement, many lords expressed relief. They saw that Daenerys genuinely intended to share power, a dramatic shift from the absolute monarchy that had caused so much turmoil in the past. Some cynics no doubt waited for the arrangement to fail, but for now, the realm seemed to accept it. A highlight of Sansa's visit came on a mild afternoon, when Daenerys invited her to see Drogon and Rhaegal up close. They walked together to a wide field outside the city walls, accompanied by a small guard. There, the dragons rested, occasionally stirring their wings. Even after the war, many people had never witnessed a living dragon, and Sansa approached with caution. When Drogon lifted his massive head, black scales shimmering, and let out a rumbling breath, Sansa froze. But Daenerys moved forward, laying a hand on Drogon's flank. He snorted, exhaling a gust of warm air. Rhaegal, green and bronze, watched from a short distance. Daenerys beckoned Sansa closer. The Stark woman inched forward, hand trembling slightly as she reached out to touch Drogon's side. She managed a brief caress before stepping back, awe mingling with unease in her expression. "They're magnificent," Sansa breathed. "Terrifying, but magnificent." Daenerys smiled gently, stroking Drogon's scales. "They helped us defeat the dead, but they're also living creatures, not just weapons." Sansa nodded, her gaze lingering on the dragons. "I see that now." They stood together in the field, dwarfed by Drogon's massive form, a symbol of the new age in Westeros, an age in which dragons did not necessarily mean war and destruction. Daenerys felt pride welling up, remembering how far she and her children had come. She only hoped to keep that legacy unmarred by the mistakes of her ancestors. All was not serenity, of course. The City Watch continued to uncover small stashes of contraband, though they struggled to trace them back to the source in Lys. Edric Storm wrote again that the Cell's words still lurked in the Stormlands, claiming to wait for word from their employer. Tensions rose slightly when a band of them clashed with local villagers over supplies, leaving a farmer injured. Edric threatened to arrest them all, but they paid restitution and withdrew further south. Daenerys told Tyrion to keep an eye on that situation. She did not want simmering hostilities turning into open conflict. Meanwhile, messages from Yara reported no major sightings of Euron Greyjoy's fleet. "He might be biding his time," she wrote, "or he might be halfway to Sithorios by now. Hard to tell with that madman." Daenerys took some comfort that Euron was not yet raiding their coasts, but she refused to let her guard down. As the final days of Sansa's visit passed, the two women concluded their negotiations. The northern retinue prepared to return home, satisfied with the new trade routes and the Grand Council's official recognition of the North's partial autonomy. Sansa and Daenerys parted with an embrace, a gesture unthinkable in their earlier days of mistrust. "Safe travels," Daenerys told her, "and know that you are always welcome here." Sansa inclined her head, a small smile on her lips. "Thank you, Your Grace. I will send ravens if there's any sign of trouble in the north." After the Northerners departed, Daenerys threw herself back into the steady hum of governance. She found a rare afternoon to ride regal above the city, letting the wind whip through her hair. The people looked up, some cheering, some gasping. She guided the green dragon in a slow circle, letting them see it was not an act of aggression, but a demonstration of vigilance. When she landed outside the gates, a crowd gathered at a respectful distance, calling out blessings and thanks. She dismounted, recalling how once she dreamed of legions of people bowing in awe. Now, the admiration she received felt more earned and more burdensome, for with it came great expectations. Evening came, bringing with it another small council meeting in the newly refurbished council chamber. Representatives from the Vale, the Reach, Dorne, and the Riverlands had arrived at various times, planning for the first official gathering of the Grand Council next moon's turn. Daenerys presided over them, hearing their concerns and encouraging them to present formal proposals. The atmosphere was mostly cooperative, though occasional barbs flew between Dorne and the Reach, or the Vale and the Riverlands. Daenerys let them argue but gently nudged them toward compromise. This was the essence of politics in a realm that wanted to heal. After the meeting, she found Jon waiting for her in the corridor. He had lingered, evidently wanting to speak. She raised an eyebrow. "Is everything all right?" He hesitated. "Yes, I wanted to see if you'd care to join me for a short walk before we retire. I've been cooped up in meetings all day." She realized she, too, could use a breath of fresh air. Certainly, she dismissed her guards, trusting that the Red Keep was safe at this hour. Together, they descended the steps and emerged into a quiet courtyard lit by torches. The air smelled of jasmine and night-blooming flowers. Crickets sang softly. They strolled side by side, the castle walls looming overhead. Daenerys noted the calm in Jon's expression. "You seem at ease," she said softly. He gave a small shrug. "More at ease than I once was. We're moving in the right direction. Fewer nightmares of the dead, fewer daily crises. Not none, but fewer." She nodded. "I feel the same. Every day brings challenges, but each one we solve makes the realm stronger. Do you ever think about—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What comes after all this? Once the realm truly finds stability?" Jon considered. "Sometimes, I used to think I'd be content to return to the Wall or to Winterfell. But things have changed. I feel responsible for this new realm we're shaping. I can't just walk away." A breeze rippled Daenerys's silver-white hair against her cheeks. "I understand. I once only dreamed of the Iron Throne, but now that I sit on it, I see how it's more than a seat. It's a duty to millions of people." They reached a small fountain where water trickled softly. Daenerys paused, and Jon turned to face her. His gray eyes were steady, reflecting torchlight. The hush of the courtyard seemed to enclose them in a private moment. She remembered the night after the Battle of Winterfell, when they'd shared a quiet moment of relief. Here, the same sense of closeness brushed at her heart. They stood in silence, letting the sound of the fountain fill the space between them. Daenerys felt the tug of emotion, a gentle longing for something more than alliances and political maneuvers. She saw it mirrored in Jon's eyes. She recalled how they had risked their lives to defend each other in the north, how they had defied the dead side by side. The bond that formed in that crucible of ice and fire was not easily forgotten. Jon's voice was quiet. "Daenerys, these past months, I've seen how you govern. You've kept your promises to the north and the other regions. You've built something new. I'm proud to serve you, but it's more than that." He swallowed, as if uncertain how far to go. She stepped closer, her heart picking up speed. "I know. It's more than that for me, too." She took a trembling breath. "But the realm is watching. They expect me to be queen first." Jon brushed a strand of her hair aside gently. "Yes, and I'm the king in the north, or at least I was in name. But I also know that alliances are often sealed by marriage. Not that we must do things simply for politics, but sometimes politics and the heart align." A swirl of excitement and apprehension washed over Daenerys. She had wondered if this moment might come. "Are you suggesting an alliance of marriage?" she asked, voice catching. He exhaled, as though finally releasing a long-held question. "Perhaps, but not just for political reasons. He hesitated, then met her gaze steadier now. "I care for you, Dany, and I see what we could do together, truly united, not just as allies, but as partners." Her heart thudded. The practical part of her mind recalled the Targaryen blood in Jon's veins, the complicated matter of incest that had historically been part of her house's tradition. Yet she also remembered how at Winterfell, the truth of Jon's parentage had come to light, that he was Aegon Targaryen, Rhaegar's son. That knowledge had nearly broken them once, overshadowed by the war. But now, the realm had grown more tolerant of difference. People had accepted a Targaryen queen with dragons, a northern king who came back from the dead. Perhaps they would accept this too, if it brought stability and reflected genuine affection. She found herself reaching up to rest a hand on his chest, feeling the solid beat of his heart. "Jon," she said softly, "I care for you as well, more than I ever expected I could, given everything. But we must tread carefully. The lords might not fully understand, especially if they think we're just forging another Targaryen dynasty." He nodded, lifting his hand to cover hers. "I know. We can wait. There's no rush. Let the realm see that we're strong together, that we have its best interest at heart. When the time is right, we can make it known. Or if the realm objects, we do what's best for the people first." She managed a small laugh, wry and tender. "You're as diplomatic as Tyrion sometimes." He smirked. "I spend enough time around him." They lingered there, hearts beating in tandem. Daenerys felt an overwhelming sense of relief and possibility. She had come to Westeros with the intention to rule, not necessarily to find love or partnership. Yet here it was, blooming in the quiet of a courtyard. She tipped her head forward until their foreheads nearly touched, savoring the simple closeness. After a moment, they drew apart slightly, though Jon kept hold of her hand. The future loomed before them, uncertain but full of hope. A million thoughts darted through Daenerys's mind. the reaction of the Grand Council, the precedent of Targaryen marriages, the vow she made to break the wheel, not reinstate the old ways. Yet none of those fears erased the warmth she felt in Jon's presence, nor the sense that together they might guide Westeros through any storm. They stayed there for a while longer, exchanging a few more quiet words, before returning to the keep. Neither made any grand pronouncements. The night had given them an unspoken promise, and that was enough for now. Tomorrow, they would carry on as queen and kingly advisor, forging alliances, stamping out threats, maintaining stability. But a day would come when they might speak more openly of marriage, when the realm would be ready to embrace a union that symbolized the final healing of the North and the South, the old and the new. Weeks turned into months, and the realm continued to stabilize under Daenerys' guiding hand. The contraband from Lys gradually diminished as the royal fleet, aided by Yara's Ironborn, intercepted more smuggling vessels. Several captains were caught and interrogated, providing enough evidence for Daenerys to formally condemn Styrio's war in a letter to the Lyseni authorities. They responded with polite dismissals, claiming no knowledge of his wrongdoing. But the blockade around King's Landing's waters and the Stepstones forced Styrio's operations to shrink, cutting into his profits. The flow of Sorrow's mist slowed to a trickle, and Daenerys ensured those unfortunate enough to be addicted received aid from the city's new infirmary, supported by the Faith and Crown funds. It was not a perfect solution, but it saved lives. Edric Storm dealt decisively with the roving Sellswords, who, after a final skirmish, agreed to disband or leave Westeros. A handful of them were arrested for crimes. Edric earned the respect of the Stormlords, showing he could wield authority with both firmness and fairness. Daenerys formally recognized him as the Lord of Storm's End, which bolstered the stability of the Stormlands. Over time, letters from Edric showed he was working closely with local knights, setting up patrols to keep bandits and rogue Sellswords at bay. The newly formed Grand Council met for the first time in King's Landing. Lords, ladies, and representatives from all corners of the realm gathered in a large chamber where chairs circled a massive table. Daenerys presided, flanked by Tyrion and Missandei, while each region's delegate spoke. There were heated debates. Dorne demanded reparations for old Lannister incursions. The Westerlands balked at some taxes. The Iron Islands requested more autonomy. Yet Daenerys guided them toward compromise, reminding them that they had survived the long night together. Each region left with some concession, but also a sense that they had been heard. It was slow, painstaking work, but it was the kind of governance Daenerys had always dreamed of. Alliances forged through reason, not fear. Amid all this progress, rumors quietly circulated about Daenerys and Jon Snow. Whispers that they spent late hours walking the ramparts, that they often consulted in private. Some asked if they were lovers. Others speculated it was a purely political relationship. Daenerys did not confirm or deny the gossip. For the time being, it served her interest to keep the realm's focus on the council and reconstruction. She and Jon shared a private understanding that when the time was right, they would make a formal announcement if they chose. And if that day came, they would stand together in front of the Iron Throne, telling the realm that House Stark and House Targaryen were forever united. Until then, they would keep building a stronger foundation. In a quiet moment between councils, Daenerys revisited the beach at Dragonstone. She flew regal there with a small escort, longing to see the place where she first set foot on Westerosi soil. Jon accompanied her, riding a sturdy ship rather than a dragon. He joked that Regal was still learning to tolerate him fully. When they arrived, the wind whipped across the black sand. Daenerys stood where she had once landed, recalling the swirl of emotions she felt that day. Excitement, fear, hope. Now she felt a resonance in her chest, a sense that she had come full circle. She was no longer just a Targaryen exiled princess. She was the queen, recognized by almost all the great houses, forging a new realm. Jon joined her, gazing at the fortress perched on the rock. "It's beautiful in a stark way," he said. She smiled, linking her arm through his. "Yes, my ancestors came here from Valyria, shaping this fortress. It's fitting that we shaped a new destiny for Westeros from here." They explored the halls for a day, greeting the small garrison stationed there, then returned to King's Landing, satisfied by the reminder of how far they had come. On the voyage back, Daenerys and Jon spoke quietly of the future, of strengthening ties with the free cities through trade, of continuing the push for new roads across Westeros, of establishing a standardized system of currency to aid commerce. These were not the glamorous topics of songs, but they formed the bedrock of a stable kingdom. One evening, as Daenerys sat in her solar, going through a series of letters, Varys slipped in with the grace of a cat. He held a small parchment between his fingers. "Your Grace," he said softly, "I thought you should see this. It comes from one of my whisperers in Essos. There are rumors that Euron Greyjoy has been sighted near Noth." Her eyes flicked with concern. "Noth? That's where Missandei's people live." Varys nodded. "Indeed, the rumors suggest Euron's men landed on the northern coast. There's no sign that he's massing an army, but it's troubling he's ventured so far. The people of Noth are peaceful, ill-equipped to face raiders." Daenerys's heartbeat quickened with anger. Missandei never mentioned any ongoing threat to her homeland, but if Euron is truly there, Varys lowered his voice. "Noth is known for a lethal butterfly fever that afflicts most invaders, but that might not be enough if Euron is determined. Some say he's searching for hidden treasures or a rumored spice route, or perhaps he's simply seeking to cause suffering where he can." Daenerys rose from her chair. "We cannot allow him to terrorize Missandei's people. She has served me faithfully, and we owe it to her to act." She paused, considering the logistical challenge. "But Noth is far across the sea. Sending a fleet would be a major undertaking." Varys laid the parchment on the table. "Yes, and we do not know the full truth of these sightings. It may be rumor or exaggeration. If we send half our navy away, we'll leave our shores exposed. I suggest verifying this information first, perhaps dispatching a smaller ship to gather intelligence. Then, if Euron truly menaces Noth, we can coordinate with Yara or other allies to mount a larger response." Daenerys nodded, feeling the tension coil in her muscles. "Yes, that's wise. But make no mistake, if Euron is attacking innocents, I will not stand by." The thought of him continuing to roam free, sowing terror, ignited her anger. Varys dipped his head in acknowledgement. "I will alert the relevant parties. We'll find out what we can." When he departed, Daenerys remained by the table, fists clenched. First contraband in Lys, now rumors of Euron near Noth. The world beyond Westeros still had pockets of cruelty. She was determined not to let them fester, but she also had to protect her own realm. Her mind churned with possible strategies. Forging an alliance with the Summer Isles navies, requesting help from Volantis or other free cities that might not want Euron's presence so close. She resolved to speak with Missandei in the morning, ensuring her friend understood that Daenerys would not abandon Noth. That night, Daenerys lay awake, the weight of many decisions pressing on her. She recalled how once she had dreamed of simply seizing the Iron Throne with dragons, letting fear do the work. Now, each day brought 100 subtle choices that required patience, diplomacy, and empathy. Yet for all the exhaustion, she preferred this path. Conquest by fire would have burned the realm's heart to cinders. This slow forging of alliances built a structure that might endure. Come morning, she spoke privately with Missandei about the rumor. The translator looked stricken at the thought of Euron near her homeland, but she steeled herself. "My people are peaceful, but they have survived many attempts at invasion, thanks to the butterfly fever. Still, Euron is cunning. He might anchor offshore and raid quickly." Daenerys took Missandei's hands in her own. "We'll do what we can. I'm sending a swift ship to gather intelligence. If the threat is real, we'll assemble a plan. Noth is far, but we won't let Euron wage terror unopposed." Tears shone in Missandei's eyes. "Thank you, Your Grace. My people, they've suffered enough from slavers and raiders. I left them, but my heart still belongs to Noth." Daenerys embraced her, trying to impart reassurance. "We will stand by you. You have my word." She followed through immediately, ordering a small, fast vessel to sail under a neutral flag, carrying agents who would discreetly investigate the situation on Noth. Then she turned her attention to the daily matters of the crown, though her thoughts strayed often to the distant shores where Euron might lurk. Days stretched into weeks, and the city's routine thrummed on. The Red Keep bustled with courtiers, petitioners, and visiting lords. Daenerys oversaw the second session of the Grand Council, which proceeded with fewer arguments than the first. Sansa had returned to the north, sending a deputy in her place. Dorne's delegate pressed for the settlement of old grievances, but Daenerys guided them to accept a phased approach rather than immediate recompense. The Vale reported stability. The riverlands praised the crown for helping chase out the last pockets of whites, and the Iron Islands reaffirmed their loyalty under Yara. During these hectic weeks, Daenerys found snatches of time to be alone with Jon. They walked by the sea or in the castle's gardens, sharing quiet confidences about the realm's future. Their bond deepened in these interludes, each aware that they might one day announce a union that would change the shape of Westerosi politics forever. Yet they remained cautious, neither wanting to ignite a wave of controversy before the realm was ready. At last, word arrived from Noth in the form of a coded letter delivered by one of Varys's little birds. Daenerys, Missandei, and Tyrion gathered in a private chamber to read it. Missandei's knuckles whitened around the parchment as she scanned the lines. Then she looked up, relief warring with tension in her eyes. The rumors were partly true. A handful of ships bearing the Kraken sigil were spotted off the northern coast. They landed briefly, but the raiders fell ill almost immediately with the butterfly fever. Euron's men retreated to their ships. The local inhabitants fled inland, so no mass slaughter occurred. Some captives were taken, but few. Daenerys released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank the gods it wasn't worse. Do they know where Euron is now? Missandei shook her head. They suspect he sailed west, perhaps heading toward the Basilisk Isles or the Stepstones again. He might be searching for a place to raid that lacks Notha's deadly fever. Tyrion let out a sigh. That man is like a plague of locusts, flitting from one land to the next. But if he's lost men to the fever, perhaps he'll think twice before returning. Daenerys nodded grimly. Still, we can't leave it at that. Once the Grand Council concludes, I'll speak with Yara about bolstering patrols near the Summer Sea. If Euron resurfaces closer to our shores, we'll be ready. She reached out to Missandei. I'm relieved your people are safe for now. We'll stay vigilant. Missandei's shoulders eased slightly. Thank you, Your Grace. I only wish we could protect them entirely. The news from Noth, while not as catastrophic as feared, underscored the fragility of peace. Daenerys was queen of Westeros, but she could not control every threat across the seas. She had to choose her battles carefully, defend her realm's interests, and when possible, help those who had stood by her, like Missandei. It was a delicate balance. In the following weeks, life in King's Landing settled into a rhythm. Jon contributed to daily governance, bridging the perspective of the North with the Crown's broader goals. Tyrion found himself increasingly busy drafting policies for the Grand Council, ensuring each region's voice was heard in the capital. Varys whispered of developments in Essos, monitoring Euron's potential alliances and Styrio's Nawar's attempts to reroute his contraband. Grey Worm oversaw the Unsullied, who now served as a disciplined royal guard, patrolling not just the Red Keep but also coordinating with City Watch. Meanwhile, Daenerys presided over it all, keenly aware that her dream of a united, peaceful Westeros was at last taking root. Sometimes she woke at dawn with a pang of disbelief, wondering if it was all real. She remembered being a timid girl in Pentos, sold off to a Dothraki warlord. She remembered her uncertain rule in Meereen, the heartbreak of betrayal, the euphoria of liberation, and the harsh lessons she learned about governance. She remembered the terrifying flight from Vys Dothrak, the forging of alliances with the Dothraki, the triumphant landing at Dragonstone. She remembered the bitter, fiery battles and the final stand against the Night King. Now she ruled from the Iron Throne, not as a tyrant but as a shepherd of unity, forging a new tapestry of alliances. And the people, though some might grumble or doubt, saw tangible improvements in their daily lives. On a bright afternoon, Daenerys found herself in the newly reconstructed city square outside the Dragon Pit, where an open-air market had sprouted. She had come incognito, wearing a plain cloak, accompanied only by Missandei and a couple of guards. They wandered among stalls selling fresh fruits, bolts of cloth, carved wooden toys. She paused to watch a puppet show depicting the War for the Dawn. The puppets were crude wooden figures, one painted like a White Walker, the other bearing a fiery sword. The children in the crowd squealed with delight when the puppet dragon breathed glittering paper flames to save the hero. Daenerys could not help but smile. As the little show ended, she overheard two locals speaking about the queen, how she was rumored to walk among the people sometimes. One of them said, "I heard she freed slaves across the sea, fought the dead in the north, and now she's building roads to help farmers. Never thought I'd see a queen who actually cared." The other shrugged. "Well, best not to speak too well of any royal. They can change like the wind." They chuckled and moved on. Daenerys felt a pang. She understood their caution. Still, the fact that they even entertained the idea that she might be good heartened her. Missandei caught Daenerys's gaze, smiling softly. "They're hopeful," she said. "It shows." Daenerys inclined her head, letting the swirl of sounds and scents wash over her. Children's laughter, haggling vendors, distant gull cries. This was what she had fought for, an everyday peace that people could take for granted. It was not perfect, but it was real enough for them to build normal lives again. They returned to the Red Keep by sundown. There, a small crisis awaited. A dispute among the king's landing bakers over the price of flour. Daenerys settled it quickly, calling for fair regulation so no single guild could exploit the market. Later, she met with a traveling septon who requested her presence at a ceremony blessing the new homes for orphans of the war. She agreed, feeling it important to show support for such endeavors. Finally, she heard from Tyrion that the next session of the Grand Council was scheduled to finalize a realm-wide census, something that had never been done in Westeros before. The rest of the night she spent drafting letters, her mind whirling with each detail. Time rolled forward. Another harvest season arrived, marked by feasts celebrating bountiful crops, thanks to the stabilized climate after the long night. The roads were safer, commerce flourished, and Daenerys's reforms gradually took hold. She continued to keep an eye on any sign of trouble: an upstart band of bandits in the Westerlands, a minor riot in Lannisport over bread prices, an Ironborn raid repelled by Yara's forces, an occasional rumor of whites in the deep wilderness, which scouts quickly disproved. None of these small sparks turned into wildfire, largely because Daenerys responded swiftly, with balanced measures of firmness and mercy. Throughout it all, Jon remained a steady presence. Their private moments grew more frequent, though they took care not to flaunt it before the realm was ready. A handful of close advisors, Tyrion, Davos, Missandei, likely guessed the depth of their bond but kept silent out of respect. Daenerys sometimes lay awake at night, imagining how the realm would react if they chose to wed. Some might rejoice at the ultimate unification of North and South. Others, more conservative, might whisper about Targaryen traditions. A few might wonder if she was dangerously mixing bloodlines. But she believed in the path they had carved. She had forged alliances through trust, not intimidation. Perhaps that same trust would allow the realm to accept a queen who married a man of Targaryen blood, a man they already respected as a leader in his own right. As the chill of autumn returned, Daenerys reflected on the journey that had brought her here, remembering the crucial choice she had made: to use words instead of flames, to build alliances instead of burning enemies. That choice had not been easy. It required swallowing pride, forging compromises, enduring slow progress. But the result was a realm that, while not free of conflict, moved steadily toward unity. She had never wanted to be known as the Mad King's daughter. Now, she believed she was shaping a legacy of a different kind. A queen who valued justice, who earned loyalty rather than demanding it with dragonfire. One night, after a day of council debates and a final flourish of paperwork, Daenerys slipped out onto a balcony overlooking the city. The lamps below glimmered like scattered stars. She rested her hands on the stone ledge, feeling the cool breeze. Behind her, footsteps. Jon approached quietly, joining her at the railing. They shared a soft, knowing smile. He gazed at the city lights. "It's peaceful from up here," he observed. "Hard to imagine the battles that were fought in these streets." She nodded. "I think of that often, how close we came to destroying all this. The realm is fragile, but at least now we have the chance to nurture it." Jon let a comfortable silence pass. Then he said, "We've accomplished so much, and there's more to do." She turned to him. "Always more to do." He reached for her hand, their fingers entwining. "But together we can meet it. You've shown everyone that peace can be won through unity. They believe in you." Daenerys felt her chest tighten with gratitude. She realized it was not just that they believed in her, but that she believed in them, in the lords and small folk, in their capacity to embrace a better future. That was the difference. With their help, she had broken the wheel, or at least begun to. She tilted her head, pressing her shoulder against Jon's in a moment of closeness. The sky stretched infinitely above, the city spread out below, and within her, a quiet determination burned bright. In that hush, she recalled the vows she'd made, to protect the weak, to end the cycle of fear. She had once thought dragons would be her only means to an end, yet she discovered the power of diplomacy, trust, and a willingness to share authority. Looking at Jon, she saw a partner who mirrored that path, a man who had sacrificed everything for the realm and found it worth saving. Together, they had guided Westeros from the brink of annihilation to a new dawn. They lingered on the balcony as the night deepened, a queen and a kingly warrior, bound by hope and purpose. Beyond them, the realm rested, lulled by the promise of a future shaped not by tyranny and bloodshed, but by cooperation and compassion. And if new threats arose, as they surely would, they would stand side by side to face them, forging a tale not of conquest by fire but of a realm drawn together by the light of unity.